Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Kate Waring. Kate Waring was born in Charleston, South Carolina, USA. She grew up in a loving family with 2 siblings, and her parents always tried their best to give their children the best life possible. As a child, Kate showed a deep love and compassion for animals, which led her to start volunteering at various animal shelters at a young age. As a teenager, she was a dancer and had a wide social circle, known for her positive attitude and outlook on life. Everyone assumed she had an educational good background, and to some extent, this was true. However, one fateful day, her life changed completely. Just before going to college, Kate opened up to her parents about being abused by someone close to the family when she was younger. Kate's parents were shocked by this confession. They felt guilty for not knowing the hardships their daughter had faced over the years. After learning this heartbreaking truth about their daughter, Kate's parents did everything they could to help her overcome it, but unfortunately, this traumatic experience left behind long-lasting consequences that became increasingly serious over time. Kate had struggled with addiction to both alcohol and illegal substances. Kate's parents recommended therapy to help her work through her issues, and she agreed to give it a try. They also suggested she move back in with them, thinking the family environment would aid in her recovery. Initially, the therapy seemed effective, but Kate continued to grapple with the emotional weight of her past, making it difficult for her to move forward. Kate's life underwent a major transformation when her psychiatrist diagnosed her with depression. Her father proposed a trip to anywhere in the world, which Kate eagerly accepted. She chose to travel to the Arctic Circle, driven by her long-held desire to see polar bears. Kate and her parents searched for suitable tours and eventually booked a trip. As the journey approached, Kate's parents noticed a marked change in her attitude, shifting from sadness to cheerful and positive. During the trip, Kate and her parents shared a wonderful experience, filled with joy and laughter. On the boat to the Arctic Circle, Kate met a fellow Russian tourist. They kept in touch throughout the trip, and when the trip ended, they still exchanged letters. Kate developed strong feelings for him, and eventually, which led her to make the decision to travel to Russia. Kate had finally begun to overcome her depression after traveling with her family in another country. However, due to visa issues, she was forced to return home. Despite this incident, Kate seems to have found joy in her life again. She planned to resolve her visa problems and had even started writing a book for her children. But everything changed on Saturday, June 12, 2009. Kate's family was away on a business trip, and she was alone at home. Normally, Kate would call her father to check in, but this time she didn't. Her father tried to reach her, but there was no answer. Concerned about her well-being, especially given her past struggles with addiction, her father asked someone to check on her. When the person arrived at Kate's home, they found her room empty, but the light was still on, suggesting that she had just stepped out and would return soon. However, Kate's medication, which she needed to take regularly, was still at home. Her parents were anxious, but they decided not to panic, thinking that Kate, being 28 years old, was capable of taking care of herself. They decided to wait until Monday, at which point her parents intended to contact the police. On Monday morning, Kate's father received a call from the bank. A bank employee informed him that someone had tried to cash a check for over $4,000 from Kate's account. The bank was unable to contact Kate, so they reached out to her father. This situation raised suspicions, as Kate's father knew she only had a few $100s in her account. The bank security team contacted Kate's father due to the large amount of the check. Although Kate's signature on the check appeared to be genuine, the bank still had concerns. The man who tried to cash the check was identified as Ethan Mack. Kate's father did not recognize Ethan's name, but he assumed Ethan might be an acquaintance of Kate's since the bank had verified her signature. As Kate was still unreachable, her father decided to contact the police. The police launched an investigation into Kate's disappearance and began by questioning Ethan Mack. Ethan claimed to have known Kate for years and stated that she had written the check to pay off old debts. He also claimed that he had frequently lent Kate money for various purchases, including clothing and jewelry. Investigations into Kate's disappearance led detectives to speak with her friends. They revealed that Kate had a long-standing friendship with Ethan. Although they were very close, her friends insisted that the relationship was not love. Ethan told detectives that he met Kate on Friday night and took her out for dinner at a restaurant. After dinner, he drove her home and then went about his own business. To support his alibi, Ethan showed detectives text messages he had exchanged with Kate, confirming their dinner plans. He also allowed detectives to search his home, where he lived with his mother, but nothing suspicious was found. However, the police still suspect his connection with the check and did not rule Ethan out as list of suspects. Detectives reconstructed Kate's activities on Friday night to determine her last whereabouts before she disappeared. She had seen her therapist in the afternoon and then visited the gym. Later, Kate entered a store and purchased a bottle of wine. Security footage showed her talking on the phone at the time, and it is possible that she was speaking with Ethan, who later picked her up and took her to dinner. Kate's parents remembered another unsettling detail from the day she went missing. Although she mentioned having some problems, she didn't specify what they were. Unfortunately, her parents did not remember this conversation until a few days later, and by then, the information was too late to be of any help in the search. As the weeks went by, Kate remained missing. Her parents felt frustrated with the police, believing they weren't doing enough to find Kate. However, in August, the case gained new information when a team of former police officers, led by lawyer Andy Savage, took it on. This team had been privately investigating unsolved cases and was particularly drawn to Kate's. The team consisted of 5 individuals, and all have significant experience in the investigative field. One of them, former Detective James Randall, began by examining Kate's bedroom. He noticed 2 suspicious things. Firstly, he found a packet of medication that Kate took regularly. Kate's parents confirmed that she was very diligent in taking her medication, so the fact that the packet was left behind was highly alarming. Next, a team member found Chinese currency on Kate's bed, which raised questions since Kate's parents had no idea where she got it or why she needed it. To gather more information, the team brought in Bobby Mitter, an expert in tracking individuals online. His skills are really useful. Bobby discovered that on the night Kate disappeared, she called her friend James around 10 p.m., but he didn't answer. Kate left a disturbing voicemail, saying someone had stolen her credit cards. Kate's phone was last active at 1:53 a.m., for some unknown reason, when she called her own voicemail. Further investigation by member Lewis revealed that the call was made from James Island, just a few kilometers from Kate's house. Another team member, Eugene Fraser, spoke with acquaintances on James Island and found something suspicious. Ethan Mack, who had allowed police to search his mother's home, didn't actually live there. Instead, he rented an apartment in a nearby building. Eugene's acquaintance, who happened to be Ethan's landlord, provided this crucial information. The detectives dug deeper and discovered that the police had not Ethan thoroughly investigated. They had only done a cursory search of his mother's house. The team decided to take matters into their own hands and began their own investigation. In the process, they found out that Ethan had a girlfriend named Heather Camp. When they asked Kate's parents about Heather, her mother remembered a strange encounter. About a month before Kate's disappearance, Kate had met Heather on a train from Washington, D.C., where Kate was experiencing visa issues to Russia. Heather had told Kate that she had been robbed of her wallet and was now destitute. Kate offered to help and lent her a substantial amount of money. Heather said she has found a job as a pediatric surgeon in South Carolina and will start work soon. Heather later said that her daughter had tragically died in a car accident in New Jersey. Her actions following this announcement seemed irrational and confusing. She did not go there, and her demeanor suggested that her daughter's death did not affect her greatly. Furthermore, they discovered that Heather was facing fraud charges in Indiana. She had impersonated a licensed physician by falsifying paperwork. The team gathered significant data, forcing them to re-examine the case from a new perspective. However, when they presented their findings to the police were completely reluctant to continue the investigation. The team discovered that the only way to get the police to take action was to gather undeniable proof that connected Heather to Kate's disappearance. To obtain this evidence, the team took drastic measures. They convinced the person who rented an apartment to Ethan Mack to install a hidden camera outside his apartment door. Additionally, they placed a GPS tracker in Ethan's car, allowing them to monitor his movements. Their efforts soon paid off. After analyzing Ethan's travel patterns, the detectives discovered that he had visited multiple pawn shops throughout the city. They followed his trail and found that at each shop, Ethan was selling small batches of jewelry. Although they couldn't confirm whether the jewelry belonged to Kate, the detectives felt they were closing in on a crucial lead. The group then hits a major roadblock when Ethan and Heather's landlord threatens to evict them because they haven't paid their rent. This made the detectives' investigation difficult, as losing access to the apartment would hinder their ability to monitor Ethan and Heather's activities. To address this issue, the detectives devised a plan to persuade the landlord to grant Ethan and Heather an extension on their rent payment. In exchange, the landlord required both Ethan and Heather to sign a contract committing to pay the outstanding debt. The team successfully negotiated this arrangement, and once the contract was signed, they immediately sent it to the laboratory for analysis. The primary objective was to compare the handwriting on the contract with Kate's signature on the $4,000 check. The results yielded a significant breakthrough. The handwriting expert confirmed, with absolute certainty, that the signature on the check matched Heather's handwriting on the contract. The team discovered that Heather had forged Kate's signature. However, they knew the police would be uncooperative, so they devised a new plan. They convinced the landlord to help them by telling Ethan that the apartment needed insect treatment. The team leader, dressed as an exterminator, accompanied the landlord to the apartment. But their plan almost failed. They realized Ethan only moved the car away from the house and did not actually leave. Upon entering the apartment, the investigator and the landlord were met with an unexpected surprise. Ethan was still at home, and Heather was the one driving his car. The investigator then had to think quickly and adjust his plan. They insist that the apartment needs to be disinfected and ask Ethan to wait outside while they spray the dangerous disinfectant. Ethan, unaware of the investigation, agreed to leave his apartment. Meanwhile, investigators begin searching for evidence to prove Ethan's involvement in Kate's disappearance. They found Ethan's backpack and examined its contents. Discovering Chinese money, it resembles the bills found on Kate's bed. However, the search yielded no other significant clues. The investigator and the landlord pretended to complete their task and left. The team needed a new strategy. After reviewing the footage from the camera outside Ethan's apartment, they noticed a man frequently entering the building, Terry Williams, a neighbor of the couple. The detective suspected that Terry might have information about Ethan and Heather's involvement in Kate's disappearance. The team decided to take a risk and offered Terry a substantial sum of money in exchange for his cooperation. They visited Terry's apartment with the offer, hoping he would reveal what he knew about Kate's disappearance. Detectives encountered an unexpected situation when they told Terry what was happening. Unbeknownst to them, Heather was at her home and overheard the conversation between the detectives and Terry. When the detectives started talking to Terry, Heather was extremely frightened. She immediately called Ethan and explained the situation in a hysterical state. The investigation team did not expect this, and they spent the next few days coming up with another plan. However, Terry later contacted the detectives and invited them to his home to discuss. Upon arriving at Terry's apartment, he reveals that although Ethan and Heather did not directly tell him about their involvement in Kate's disappearance, but he had suspected that the couple had done something wrong to Kate. Terry then produced an iPod that Heather had given him shortly after Kate's disappearance. He had assumed the iPod belonged to Kate. The detectives examined the device and, using its serial number, confirmed that it indeed belonged to Kate. This discovery provided the investigation team with sufficient evidence to return to the police department. The local police could no longer ignore the case and decided to take action. After reviewing the evidence gathered by the team, they arrested Ethan and Heather. During the initial interrogation, Heather agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. She claimed Kate's body was on Watala Island, approximately 20 miles from her house. However, when the police searched the area, they found no of Kate's body. It became clear that Heather had given them false information. Andy Savage then tried a different approach, suspecting Heather's direct involvement in Kate's murder. He met with her and offered a deal. In exchange for revealing Kate's body location, he would help get her off the forgery charges papers. Heather, seeing this as her only chance, agreed to the deal. She provided a detailed description of the location on the outskirts of Watala Island, claiming Kate's body was still there. The detectives decided to search the area without police accompaniment, but they were initially disappointed when they found nothing. However, they returned the next day, and they eventually discovered Kate's body. The forensic doctors were unable to determine the cause of Kate's death. But the truth eventually came to light when Heather began to confess. In August 2009, Heather signed a confession admitting to murder, obstruction of justice, and bank check forgery. The police investigation revealed that Heather had been committing fraud for years and had targeted Kate as her next victim during a trip from Washington. Heather later met Ethan and started a romantic relationship with him. Ethan, however, did not immediately plead guilty, and his trial began in October 2010. The prosecution used Heather's testimony to reconstruct the incident surrounding Kate's disappearance. According to Heather's account, on the day Kate vanished, Kate discovered that Heather had deceived her and stolen her credit cards. Kate threatened to inform her father. Heather confided in Ethan, who chose to support her despite his long-standing friendship with Kate. The investigation revealed that Kate was not alone with Ethan on the night she disappeared. Heather was also present. It appears that Heather and Ethan attempted to negotiate with Kate at a restaurant, trying to persuade Kate not to expose Heather's deception. During this meeting, Heather may have promised Kate that when she got to Ethan's apartment, Heather would return the stolen credit card to her. Upon Kate's arrival, Heather and Ethan may have been waiting for the right moment to end her life. However, the court ultimately questioned Heather's account of the incident and found her guilty, sentencing her to 39 years in prison. Ethan received a slightly... Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Belinda Temple. 1986 was the year Belinda started her college education in her hometown. Unlike her twin sister Brenda, who attended Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed close to home. Her decision was largely influenced by her relationship with Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years her senior. Belinda was deeply infatuated with Marshall, and this relationship began during her high school years. However, Belinda's parents were not in favor of this relationship. They feared that being involved with Marshall would hinder their daughter's opportunities for a prestigious education. They also worried about the potential consequences of an early pregnancy, which might lead to Belinda dropping out of college altogether. The disapproval of Belinda's parents led to numerous arguments at home. Belinda's mother was particularly opposed to the idea of her daughter moving in with Marshall before marriage. She made her stance clear by stating, "He is nobody to you. Once you're married, you can move out, but until then, you have a home here." This remark seemed to only strengthen Belinda's resolve. In a bold move, Belinda and Marshall announced their decision to get married during a family dinner. Despite the tension, they shared their plans, which was met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Belinda's mother was visibly upset but seemed resigned to their decision, gritting her teeth and remaining silent for the rest of the evening. In reality, Belinda had made up her mind to marry Marshall as a way to assert her independence and prove to her parents that she was capable of making her own decisions. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, invited a few close friends, and she and Marshall signed the papers. Afterward, they strolled around the city, enjoying champagne and each other's company. The next day, Belinda packed her belongings and moved in with her husband, who was still living with his parents. They hadn't planned to rent a separate place. Getting married didn't change much in their relationship. As mentioned earlier, Belinda's primary reason for marrying was to gain independence and stop her mother's nagging. However, her new life turned out to be quite unpleasant. Less than 6 months later, Marshall started spending less time at home, claiming he was working late. In reality, he was seeing another woman. Belinda discovered this when she noticed her husband acting strangely. One day, she waited until his work hours ended and followed him, which is when the truth came to light. She saw Marshall walking hand in hand with a woman she didn't know, likely a colleague. The deceived wife, Belinda, left her husband, Marshall, after discovering his infidelity. She didn't create a scene, but instead packed her belongings and returned to her mother's house. Marshall tried to win her back, but Belinda was too proud to forgive him. They eventually got a divorce. A few years later, Belinda was pregnant and working part-time at a school. Despite her pregnancy, she was concerned about missing the upcoming basketball competition between schools and not being able to prepare her team properly. Her colleague, Richard Bachman, didn't share her enthusiasm and had often expressed his disinterest in teaching. Belinda couldn't understand why Bachman, a 40-year-old man who seemed uninvested in his job, still held his position. As a diligent teacher, Belinda noticed that one of her students, Riley Joe Sanders, a high school senior, had been absent from class for months. She reached out to her colleagues to determine if the issue was specific to her class or if Sanders was a habitual truant. Her colleagues told her that Sanders came from a troubled home and rarely attended school, implying that his absences were not Belinda's problem. That evening, Belinda decided to take further action. She visited Riley Joe Sanders' mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious conversation with her. Although the talk seemed to have an impact, it didn't quite yield the results Belinda had hoped for. Sanders began attending class and participating on an equal level with his peers. However, during a basketball game, when Belinda called out Sanders for pushing an opponent and exhibiting poor behavior, he responded with insults and threats, warning her to be careful, especially in the evenings. After her breakup with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left for her in her hometown. She decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. It was there that Belinda found her true calling. Alongside her studies, she worked part-time as a basketball coach and had high aspirations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like her, he was a part-time coach but for soccer, and he also played for the university team as its captain. Soccer had been an integral part of David's life since childhood, and it was clear even then that he was destined to excel. He consistently performed well for his team, earning the respect of all his teachers. Despite his difficult nature, which could lead him to insult or even physically confront others, David's behavior was often overlooked because of his on-field performance. During games, he would become fully engaged and find it difficult to calm down for a long time afterward. However, one of his teammates later revealed that David's aggressive behavior was due to his use of steroids. David's behavior changed significantly when he was with Belinda. He became a caring and chivalrous partner, but with one major caveat: he would become aggressive and confrontational if he perceived anyone as a threat to their relationship. Belinda was well received by David's parents, who admired her love for sports, a common interest she shared with their son. However, Belinda's twin sister and friends were less than thrilled about her relationship with David. They had known Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person, but since being with David, she had become more subdued and focused on pleasing him. Her relationship with her family also suffered, with less frequent phone calls and visits, which naturally caused concern among her loved ones. As graduation approached, David and Belinda adopted a bull terrier named Shaq. After receiving their diplomas, they got married in 1999. January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. With the due date nearing, doctors predicted Belinda would go into labor within a couple of weeks. As with many pregnant women, Belinda was frequently exhausted, and caring for their son Evan added to her fatigue. One evening, David decided to give his wife a break from household chores and allow her some rest. To minimize distractions, David took Evan for a walk in the park. As they strolled through the fresh air, their hunger grew, so they stopped at a cafe for a snack. After their cafe visit, David and Evan headed home. Upon arrival, David noticed the front door had broken glass. He quickly told Evan, "I'm going to take you to visit Harland for a bit, okay?" Without waiting for Evan's response, David led him to a neighbor's house, where family friends lived. Evan, struggling to keep up, asked, "Why can't we go to Mom's?" David, unsure of how to respond, said, "Mom's in the hospital right now." The neighbor, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to unexpected visitors when David rushed past him, taking his son into the living room without a word. David then ran towards his own house, leaving Quentin confused. Quentin shouted to his wife to care for the child and followed David. "What's going on?" Quentin asked, but before David could respond, they reached David's house, where Quentin saw the front door was broken. Upon entering, Quentin saw the house was in disarray, with open closets and belongings scattered everywhere. A trail of blood led to the stairs, prompting Quentin to push David aside. Under the stairs, in the dressing room, they found Belinda lying face down with a severe head wound. David, seemingly in shock, didn't react. Instead, he took out his phone and called the police. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene, but they were initially unable to enter the house due to the Temple family's aggressive bull terrier, Shaq, who growled and barked at the unfamiliar men in uniform. One officer drew his gun in response, but David intervened, shouting at them to put their guns away and rushing to restrain the dog in the garage. Upon entering the house, the police assessed the scene and concluded that the perpetrators were likely burglars who had not expected Belinda to be home. Despite her pregnancy, they had shot her to eliminate her as a witness. When police started investigating a crime scene, they were baffled by how the burglar got past the fierce dog, Shaq, that guarded the house. They were also unsure how the perpetrator distracted the dog. Upon closer inspection of the front door, police found broken glass, but its positioning suggested it was broken while the door was already unlocked, which seemed strange. Inside the living room, a box on the nightstand caught their eye, containing jewelry such as earrings, rings, and a gold chain. What puzzled them was why the thief left the jewelry untouched. As police spent more time in the Temple family home, they became increasingly convinced that the whole scene was staged. In their experience, thieves usually take all valuables they can carry, but in this case, nothing appeared to be missing. The presence of the dog continued to raise suspicions, leaving them feeling that something was off. Regarding the murder, Belinda was shot in the back of the head with what was likely a 12-gauge shotgun while kneeling with their back to the killer. However, shotguns are an unusual choice for robbers due to their bulk and difficulty in concealing and transporting. This, combined with the fact that the murder took place at 4 p.m., makes it improbable that a thief would be openly carrying a shotgun at that time of day. When questioned by police about firearms in his home, David mentioned owning a couple of rifles, which he showed to the officers. Notably, the shotgun that could have been used in Belinda's murder was not among the firearms he presented. David went to the police station voluntarily to give a statement and detail the items that had been stolen. Despite appearing nervous, he was cooperative with the police. During this time, his son Evan stayed at Quentin's house, oblivious to what had happened. In 1996, David Temple and Quentin Harland were neighbors and co-workers at a school. They were close friends and often socialized together outside of work, watching sports and hosting barbecues with their families. However, their friendship became strained when Heather Scott, a new teacher, joined the school. Quentin was attracted to Heather, but she rejected his invitation to dinner. What Quentin didn't know was that David had also developed feelings for Heather, and they started a secret relationship. Quentin was angry and hurt when he found out that his married friend, who had a son, was involved with someone else. Despite his feelings, Quentin kept David's secret, even as their co-workers began to notice the romantic connection between David and Heather outside of school. Heather didn't know that David was married, as he didn't wear a wedding ring and kept his personal life private. Belinda had no idea about David's secret life. She once confided in Quentin about her suspicions that David was cheating on her, but Quentin quickly dismissed her concerns. "You're just being paranoid," he told her. "David is a devoted husband and family man. How could you think such a thing?" However, there were signs that something was off. David, who had once been extremely respectful towards Belinda, now frequently insulted her, even in front of others. He would call her fat, despite her only gaining a little weight after childbirth, and would often ask her to leave the room when they had guests, implying that her appearance was embarrassing. Belinda didn't stand up for herself or have a serious conversation with David about his behavior. Instead, she cried at night and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. David became increasingly estranged from his family due to a new relationship with a coworker. He put more psychological pressure on his wife, Belinda, and their communication consisted only of insults. Although he never physically harmed her, the verbal abuse continued. That year, Belinda discovered she was pregnant again. The news made her forgive David's past transgressions, and she felt ecstatic. David attempted to appear as a happy father, but it seemed insincere. Sometimes, he would not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask why because she feared his angry outbursts and the potential scandal that could follow. A pregnant Belinda often asked her husband David for help in preparing for the baby's birth, such as running errands, fixing up the nursery, and installing shelves. However, David consistently ignored her requests, leaving Belinda to handle everything on her own, including shopping, painting, and assembling furniture, despite being 8 months pregnant. As Christmas approached, Belinda suggested discussing gift ideas with David, but he proposed skipping gifts that year to save money for the baby. Given the doctor's warning that Belinda might go into premature labor, this seemed like a reasonable decision. However, on Christmas, David didn't even get Belinda a small gift. Instead, he announced that he was leaving to spend the New Year's holidays with friends on a hunting trip. Belinda confided in her sister, who immediately changed her plans to be with Belinda, ensuring she wouldn't feel abandoned, especially since labor could start at any moment. David, during the holidays, spent the time with Heather, who wore a gold necklace given to her by David as a Christmas gift. By 2007, it appeared that David Temple had all but moved on from his wife's murder, as if Belinda had never been a part of his life. The fact that it had been 5 years since the murder and the killer had yet to be caught seemed of little concern to him. He had married Heather in 2001, and together they were raising Evan. The police suspected David of wrongdoing, but they couldn't gather enough evidence to prove anything. While investigating the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they discovered that a house on the next street had been burglarized 8 days before the murder at the Temple house. The perpetrator was none other than Riley Joe Sanders, a persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught, who had previously threatened her. He was called in for questioning immediately. Riley had no alibi for the day of the murder, and his father owned a 12-gauge shotgun. However, when the police searched the Sanders house, they did not find the weapon. Realizing the police had reason to detain him, Riley confessed that he was with friends on the day of the murder. He had hidden this information because they were smoking pot in a large group, and he did not want to implicate his friends. As a result, the charge against Riley was dropped. In November 2004, police officers arrived at David's doorstep, handcuffed him, and informed him that he was being held on suspicion of murdering Belinda Temple. David denied the allegations. His trial began in 2007. The investigation revealed that David's motive for the crime was his new relationship with Heather. Colleagues of David testified that during Belinda's pregnancy, he boasted about replacing his fat and pregnant wife with the younger and more attractive Heather. According to the prosecution, David killed Belinda as soon as she returned home from work, as evidenced by her still wearing her work uniform and shoes. They alleged that he then staged a robbery, scattering belongings around the house, before quickly driving to the park with his son to create an alibi. The prosecution also highlighted several suspicious facts, including that nothing was stolen from the house, and a fierce dog in the yard would have prevented any stranger from entering. Furthermore, witnesses reported seeing David's car stopped near a rice paddy, where the murder weapon was likely discarded, with only his son Evan present in the vehicle at the time. However, the shotgun was never found in the area where the crime occurred. Heather testified that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious, and she didn't even love him. This statement introduced uncertainty into the jury's decision, as it raised questions about David's motive. Would he really kill his wife over a non-serious relationship, or was Heather lying to protect him? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, a friend of Riley Sanders came forward to the police to clear David's conscience. According to this friend, Riley had previously confided in him about taking his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home. Riley wanted to teach his teacher, David Temple, a lesson. Riley claimed that he had almost entered the house but was thwarted by a bull terrier that ran out of the garage. He shot at the dog but missed, and fearing the noise would attract neighbors, he quickly ran away. This new testimony was submitted to the court, prompting a review of the case. David was released from prison on bail while the review was underway. Meanwhile, Heather decided she no longer wanted to be married to someone who had spent so much time in jail and whose future was uncertain. She filed for divorce. The jury took a long time to deliberate on David's sentence. The case wasn't revisited until 2023, when David was still awaiting a final decision on his sentence. David was ultimately convicted and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Throughout the trial, his son Evan struggled to accept that his father was capable of committing such a heinous crime. Evan continued to support his father until the very end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ellie Costile. Alexandria Costile, known as Ellie, was born on September 11, 1997 in St. Louis. As a blonde-haired girl, she grew up with the care and love of her parents, Cindy and Keith, who supported her endeavors. Ellie excelled academically and in sports like track and field and golf. Her dream was to attend the University of Mississippi, and she became a student there, living in a dormitory in Oxford and being popular among her peers. Friends and relatives described her as a lively and energetic person. Summer on campus is quiet, with few students remaining. Those who stay attend extra lectures or prepare for next year, then unwind at local bars and nightclubs in the evening. Ellie Costell, an upperclassman, stayed to improve her knowledge, and having just passed a key exam, was planning to celebrate with friends. A popular spot among young people in Oxford Square is a small bar that serves pizza and drinks. Its lively atmosphere, complete with dim lighting, loud music, and a colorful selection of drinks, makes it a place where the bartenders know many customers by name. On the evening of July 19th, Ellie met up with friends at this bar, where they chatted and had a good time. Despite her efforts to have fun, Ellie seemed tense and spent most of the evening texting someone on her phone. After having a couple of cocktails, she discreetly left the bar. This would be one of the last times Ellie Costell, a University of Mississippi student, was seen in public. On July 20th, 2019, around 10:30 a.m., police officers stumbled upon a young woman's body near an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, about 30 miles from the university, during their routine patrol. The victim had been shot 9 times in the back, and investigators found 11 shell casings at the scene. A purse containing a driver's license and a student ID belonging to 21-year-old Alexandria Costell, a University of Mississippi student, was found nearby on the roadside. Ellie's death shocked the University of Mississippi community. Her father confirmed the news on Facebook, saying police told them Saturday that she'd been a crime victim. Witness interviews established that a few days before the incident, Ellie's parents had visited her from St. Louis, during which she expressed her enthusiasm for the upcoming academic year at the university, with no reservations about staying on campus for the summer. Moreover, data from her Apple Watch revealed that following a phone conversation with her mother, Ellie sent several messages to Brandon. An examination of these messages revealed that 3 months prior to the incident, Ellie had confided in Brandon about some shocking news. Since Brandon was the last known person to have communicated with the victim, he became a person of interest to the police. A closer look at their messages further disclosed that Ellie and Brandon had been in an on-again, off-again romantic relationship. Brandon Theld, a tall, dark-haired young man with an athletic build, was also a student at the University of Mississippi, hailing from Fort Worth, Texas, and raised in a well-mannered family. In 2016, when Ellie met Brandon as a freshman, she fell for him immediately. The young couple started dating, but they never formally declared themselves as an official couple. While Ellie's feelings for Brandon were genuine, he never showed a serious commitment towards her. Ellie's friends knew that her relationship with Brandon was troubled. They frequently argued, even in public. The couple would often break up, only to get back together after a while. On April 12, 2019, Ellie told Brandon that she was pregnant, but he didn't respond. She sent him numerous texts and voice messages, but he ignored her. 3 months later, Brandon finally replied, saying that he didn't want a child because it would ruin his life. He refused to help or support Ellie, telling her to just take a pill or make a doctor's appointment to deal with the situation. Despite being deeply in love, Ellie desperately wanted to talk to Brandon in person, but he kept refusing. On the night of July 19th, Ellie went to a local bar with her friends at 11:52 p.m. Surveillance cameras showed her leaving the bar and taking a taxi home. About 30 minutes later, Brandon called her at 1:58 a.m. on July 20th. Ellie got into a vehicle, unaware that it would be her last ride. She headed to an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, where Brandon was waiting. The drive to the camp was supposed to take around 45 minutes. Witnesses reported hearing gunshots in that area between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. On Sunday afternoon, investigators contacted Brandon Theld, requesting him to visit the police station to discuss Ellie Costell. Initially, he made excuses to avoid the meeting, but eventually promised to appear on Monday at 8:30 a.m. However, When Brandon failed to show up at the police station on Monday, July 22, 2019, investigators began tracking his phone's location. The data revealed that he was heading back to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. As a result, authorities issued an alert for his pickup truck. 2 days later, Brandon was finally arrested when he stopped at a gas station in Memphis. Brandon Feld, a 22-year-old, was arrested and charged with homicide in the local area. Despite this, his lawyer and father insisted that he was innocent. As the Oxford community tried to make sense of the violent death of one of their own, the death of Ellie Castillo quickly drew national attention. Reporters from all over the country came to Oxford, eager to learn more about Ellie and the person accused of killing her. Brandon Feld maintained his innocence until the end, but the evidence was against him. A gun matching the shooting was found in his possession, along with bloody clothing. He had gone to Texas to get his father's gun, suggesting premeditation. His internet history showed searches for abortion services and ways to avoid punishment for a crime. A letter to his parents revealed his dark thoughts and feelings, where he mentioned that something in him just didn't work, and that he thought it was the end for him. Investigator Jared Bundren shared some previously known details about the shocking crime with the public. He revealed that Ellie had told Brandon she suspected she was pregnant, but Brandon didn't want her to have the baby. This led to numerous arguments between the couple, with Ellie wanting to meet in person to discuss the situation. Brandon refused to meet until the day of the incident. The police wanted to question Brandon and asked him to come to the station for questioning. However, Brandon resisted and made excuses for not being able to come in. Concerned, the police began tracking his cell phone and located him. They found that Brandon was heading to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. Authorities alerted nearby police departments, and Brandon was arrested when he stopped to refuel at a gas station in Memphis. Upon his arrest, the police found blood on him and a pistol in his truck that matched the weapon used in Ellie's murder. Despite Brandon's claims of innocence, the police charged him with the crime. Morgan acted quickly after hearing about the student's death, seeking guidance from administrators. She noted the university's past experiences with student suicides and accidents, but this was a new situation. Morgan briefly addressed Ellie's passing in class, alerted counselors, and allowed students to postpone exams if needed. She expressed sympathy, saying her heart went out to Ellie's parents and friends, stressing that parents shouldn't have to bury their children. As it turned out, Ellie Cotile, in her need for support, had told friends that she was pregnant with Brandon Feld's child. Her sisters knew she was pregnant and that she had told Brandon. A classmate said that he was very upset about it, worrying about how it would ruin his life and future. He was angry that she wouldn't have an abortion, but she said she didn't believe in that. Ellie tried to end her 17-week pregnancy using harmful methods like excessive drinking and substance use. Brandon knew but was seeing someone else. He wanted her to abortion, but she morally opposed it. He was abusive, frequently breaking up with her in anger, then returning apologetic and she'd take him back. Ellie Cotile's shocked friends and classmates struggled to cope with the news and paid tribute to their friend on social media. Her friend Anna Pasco mentioned that it was just hard for her because when she saw Ellie's face, all she could think about was what Ellie went through, what she thought, and what she said. Anna added that it was very, very difficult. On Thursday evening in her hometown of St. Louis, a memorial service was held for Ellie Cotile at the request of the community. However, no public statements were made in Oxford about memorial events. Only black ribbons encircling the majestic white column of the women's houses, including Alpha where Ellie lived, served as a reminder of the tragedy. The young student's demise unsettled the entire state. Despite withholding key facts for investigative purposes, several news agencies conducted in-depth investigations and uncovered surveillance footage of Ellie Castillo near the location where her body was discovered early Saturday morning. The footage, captured on cameras, shows Castile with a man at a 24-hour store in the Harmontown area. A store's owner revealed that police visited his store on Sunday to review the surveillance footage. However, he claimed that the investigators didn't explain the reason for their visit and took some evidence with them when they left. According to him, the video footage is erased every 72 hours, making it impossible to retrieve the captured footage. The business owner expressed his shock, saying, "We've never had any problems or violent incidents here. This is a small town, it's quiet, everyone knows each other. This is just madness." Lafayette County Sheriff's Office keeps investigation details quiet to ensure the perpetrator is brought to justice, says Coroner Rocky Kennedy, who explains that revealing too much now could jeopardize the case. Kennedy shrugged off intense media scrutiny, saying every case is equally important and gets the same level of attention. Michelle Miller stressed the need to recognize relationship warning signs after Ellie's death, questioning if it could have been prevented. Brandon Theld was charged and sentenced to life, with parole possible at 65, now serving at the Mississippi State Penitentiary. Brandon Theld showed remorse at his trial, apologizing to Ellie Castile's family and his own for her death. A key piece of evidence was that Ellie was never pregnant, leaving us to wonder why she fabricated it. She seemed to believe the lie, hoping it would win Brandon's heart. Tragically, her loved ones still grieve. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sean Eckerd. Donna and Samuel Eckerd, who came from a long line of family relationships, tied the knot. Between them, they had 6 grown children from previous marriages. After facing numerous challenges in their early marriages, they found comfort and solace in each other. The couple decided to settle down in San Diego, California. They rented a spacious family home and never missed attending church services on weekends. A few years after their move, Donna gave birth to a son named Stanley, and 2 years later, Sean was born. Donna dedicated her life to raising her sons and taking care of the home. As a result, Stanley and Sean grew up in a loving and nurturing environment. They both attended a reputable local school, and every weekend, the entire family would participate in church activities without fail. The Eckerd family was a tight-knit one, with the adult children regularly keeping in touch and gathering together for family holidays, despite being scattered across the continent. Sean was a sociable and lively individual, boasting a charismatic personality that effortlessly drew people to him. He was an attentive listener and had a talent for empathy, making it easy for him to form friendships. In contrast, Stanley was more introverted and cautious around new people and experiences, which made socializing a bit more challenging for him. Despite their differing personalities and age gap, the brothers shared a common circle of friends and classmates. Unwaveringly loyal, they looked out for each other, often acting as one unit. As they grew up, they developed into well-mannered and academically successful young men. Their bond was built on trust and mutual respect, with their parents valuing respect above all else. Good-natured teasing between the brothers was commonplace, but always done in a light-hearted and humorous spirit. Donna and Samuel raised their children, instilling in them faith in God and guiding them according to God's laws. As the Eckerd brothers grew up, their lives unfolded naturally. However, their interests gradually diverged, becoming starkly different. Sean, the youngest, developed a passion for music and played in a band, while Stanley, the eldest, became fascinated with martial arts. Each brother's life was filled with vivid experiences and emotions, which they would share with the family in the evenings. Every evening, when the family gathered before dinner, Sean's stories about music, friends, and upcoming plans would dominate the conversation. The family would listen intently to Sean, leaving little time for Stanley to share his own experiences. Stanley felt that he didn't have grand plans or exciting stories to share, let alone friends to brag about. As a result, he humbly listened to his brother's stories, never getting the chance to share his own. On one memorable evening, Sean shared with his family that he had met a neighbor, Mary Jane, a delicate young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair. He was captivated by her and had been drawn to her house by the enchanting piano melodies drifting from her open window. Entranced, he walked into her home without knocking, but his self-assurance and charm helped him to extricate himself from the awkward situation and make a good impression on the girl he was interested in. Although Mary Jane was a few years older than Sean, they were able to maintain a friendly relationship. Sean, being the social butterfly, would often organize picnics, inviting Mary Jane to join in. They spent their time strolling, visiting parks, and taking in the views from observation decks. However, their blossoming adolescent romance was cut short by the harsh realities of the adult world. The Eckerd family received devastating news about the illness of Donna's elderly mother, Sean and Stanley's great-grandmother. In pursuit of a better life, Sean's parents tried to consider the interests of each family member, but their decision ultimately changed the course of their lives. Sean was reluctant to leave his hometown, his friends, and Mary Jane, but the decision had already been made. The Eckards left the city where their children had grown up and moved to a new state. In 2005, they settled in Donna's mother's house in Spring Hill, Florida, starting a fresh chapter. For the whole family, this move felt like a breath of fresh air, as it proved to be the right decision. Sean and Stanley's grandmother was recovering well. Initially, the move was tough on Sean, who missed his band, strolls with Mary Jane, and hangouts in his favorite city. However, Sean's optimistic nature soon took over, and he began to build a new life as vibrant as the one he had left behind. Donna and Samuel found jobs at the Presbyterian Church, where they spent most of their time. Donna looked after the children in the nursery, while Samuel assisted with the chapel. Over time, the brothers reconciled and made new friends together. At their new school, they revived their old life. Sean rejoined the school band, while Stanley attended a martial arts school near their home. Despite their busy schedules, Sean remained obsessed with Mary Jane. Every night, he'd lock himself in his room and talk to her on the phone for hours. Their goodbyes always ended the same way, with Sean promising to visit her once he got his parents' permission. While Sean held on to his first love, the more reserved and modest Stanley struggled to find his place within the family. In an attempt to assert himself, Stanley made a series of poor decisions that would ultimately have devastating consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, Stanley told his parents he was quitting school to focus on martial arts and start a club. However, his extreme enthusiasm led him to associate with the wrong crowd, and he began committing petty fraud and trying illegal drugs. In 2007, his questionable connections landed him in trouble with the law, and he was arrested for stealing and charged with felony fraud. The news of Stanley's misbehavior hit his mother, Donna, hard. She had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital, but a lawyer hired by her sister-in-law helped resolve the situation. The lawyer successfully defended Stanley, highlighting the lack of concrete evidence, which led to a suspended sentence. This experience terrified Stanley, leaving him feeling guilty and withdrawn as he hoped to be understood and accepted by his family. After what happened to Stanley, Sean kept his plans private during the summer vacation. He worked as a waiter, saving money, and left a note for his mom saying he was heading to California to see Mary Jane. The 2-day bus ride seemed endless, with the scenery and time of day changing outside his window. He imagined seeing Mary Jane at the final stop, his heart full of anticipation. The bus pulled up to the final stop, and Sean couldn't wait to see Mary. Through the window, he'd caught a glimpse of her bright smile and her long hair, which she was tucking behind her ears. They shared a special connection, having spent some of the happiest days of their lives together, often reminiscing about their carefree high school days. It was during one of their strolls that Sean first confessed his love to Mary, and to his delight, she felt the same way. As they sat on a bench, Sean suddenly felt dizzy, his vision turned dark, and he lost consciousness. Sean was rushed to the hospital, where his condition rapidly deteriorated. Mary Jane quickly contacted Sean's sister, Jennifer, who flew from Florida to California to be by his side. The doctors diagnosed Sean with a tick-borne illness that can cause severe complications, including brain inflammation, in a matter of days. A long and arduous battle for Sean's life and health ensued. After over a month in a coma and 6 months of rehabilitation, the doctors finally managed to revive Sean. The road to recovery was tough, and the tick bite he'd suffered during their summer walk had turned out to be a serious injury. Jennifer took Sean back to Florida, where he began a long and difficult therapy. Mary Jane was left to wait anxiously, with phone calls being their only means of communication. The Eckhart family came together in the face of a series of troubles and unexpected illnesses. Donna went to great lengths to help her son Sean recover from a serious illness, carefully monitoring his diet and exercise to ensure he made a full recovery. Meanwhile, Stanley harbored feelings of resentment and jealousy towards his brother, which only grew as time passed. After his recovery, Sean regained his strength and resumed his studies in music. In 2009, he completed his studies and began making plans to return to Mary Jane, the girl he loved, and introduce her to his parents. However, his plans were not meant to be. Stanley introduced Sean to his dream girl, Samantha, a native of Florida, who quickly clicked with the two brothers. Samantha was charmed by Sean's cheerful and sociable nature, but Stanley was smitten with her and actively courted her. They went on several romantic dates, culminating in a passionate kiss. Stanley was over the moon, but Samantha had still been thinking about Sean. She sent him a message confessing her feelings and inviting him on a city walk. Sean agreed, and they spent the evening strolling along the waterfront, talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. However, Sean didn't try to win Samantha over, as he had already given his heart to someone else. Samantha, feeling down, sent a message to Stanley revealing that Sean had been seeing her behind his back and confessed his strong feelings for her. That same evening, Stanley was enraged. He stormed into his brother's room and they had a heated conversation. Initially, they spoke in hushed tones, but their words soon turned into loud shouts, followed by an eerie silence. Although their parents were home, they were accustomed to the brothers' loud arguments, so they didn't think much of it. It was Mom who first realized Sean was missing. He hadn't returned her calls. Recalling the argument from the previous evening, she got Stanley's explanation that Sean had left home after their fight. 2 days into the search, the police received a chilling call. The caller was Sean's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who took the call only heard a woman's scream and a loud, piercing male moan in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally managed to record Jennifer's desperate plea for help. Jennifer continued to scream, begging for assistance and reporting that Stanley had killed Sean. She said Stanley was in the house, talking to their mom, while their dad was in shock over his dead son, who had been buried in the backyard since early Saturday morning. The police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy were met with a horrifying sight in the backyard of the house. Samuel was on his knees, his hands covered in dirt, as he frantically pulled his son's body out of the ground, screaming and desperately trying to clean the dirt off Sean's body. In an instant, a quiet neighborhood with well-manicured lawns, where the two young brothers would often wave to their neighbors, was transformed into a scene of violent tragedy. The once happy family, who had raised 2 sons, was now left with the traumatic memory of digging in the ground only to find one son's lifeless body and watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Eckhart was arrested on suspicion of premeditated murder. During his initial interrogation, he claimed that he had not intended to kill his brother. According to Stanley, he struck Sean on the head in a fit of anger, causing the fatal injury. After realizing Sean was dead, Stanley tied up the body and secretly buried it in the backyard to avoid disturbing his mother. Stanley's statement at the inquest seemed callous and calculating, contrary to his claim of being a loving brother. He said, "I buried him after all, that's what you do with dead people." In his defense, Stanley maintained that he covered up the incident to spare his mother the shock of learning about her son's death. He planned to rebury the body once his parents were no longer around. Stanley's behavior during the interrogation was inconsistent. At times, he broke down in tears, confessed to the crime, and expressed remorse, portraying the incident as an accident. However, he also displayed hatred towards Sean, speaking harshly and bitterly about his brother, whom he blamed for his troubles and for winning their mother's and Samantha's affections. On the same day, Stanley was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, with no chance of bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean's body and presented her findings to the court. Her forensic examination revealed that Sean had bruising on his neck, both under the skin and in the form of rope marks, indicating that his neck had been constricted to make breathing difficult. The autopsy concluded that Sean's death was caused by a head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Mageau carefully reviewed the case. The first hearing took place on February 25, 2011, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckerd, sat in the second row, weeping as they watched their oldest son being led into the courtroom in handcuffs. On April 9, 2013, the trial of Stanley Eckerd began in Hernando Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Taddy. The defense team, led by attorney Alan Hunter, faced prosecutor Pete in the prosecution. The prosecution's main objective was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime, whereas the defense argued that the tragedy resulted from a spontaneous fight. In his closing statement, Alan Hunter appealed to the jury to consider Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime, allegedly driven by good intentions. Stanley Eckerd was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, which carried a mandatory life sentence if convicted. The verdict would determine his fate, with sentencing scheduled for May 13th. Alternatively, if convicted of second-degree murder, Stanley faced up to life in prison. Throughout the trial, Stanley maintained that he never intended to kill his brother 3 years prior, before burying him in the front yard of their house. Prior to the trial, Eckerd had rejected a plea deal from prosecutors, which offered to limit his prison sentence to 20 years in exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder. As the clerk read the verdict, Stanley remained stone-faced, his fate now in the hands of District Judge Anthony Taddy, who had presided over the 5-day trial. Samuel and Donna, the parents of the accused, wept quietly as the jury left the courtroom. Samuel's sobs soon turned to screams as numerous relatives gathered around him and his wife, Donna. The jury had found Eckerd guilty of second-degree murder, but didn't completely absolve him of guilt, as they believed that he didn't plan to kill 19-year-old Sean. The jury, consisting of 9 women and 3 men, reached this verdict after deliberating for approximately 2.5 hours. The Eckerd family maintained that they believed Stanley's account of the events that unfolded in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010. They also criticized the state attorney's office for filing charges against Eckerd. Later that day, Samuel Eckerd praised Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter for doing an excellent job. The family, however, questioned the appropriateness of the sentence and subsequently filed an appeal to overturn the verdict, which was denied. Samuel Eckerd expressed his surprise at the jury's verdict, stating that he couldn't understand how the jury reached a verdict of second-degree murder in about 2 hours. He added that despite that, their faith was not shaken. One undisputed fact that emerged during the trial was that after his brother's death, Stanley pulled his body out of Sean's bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. It was Samuel Eckerd who discovered Sean's body 2 days later. Pete Mageau showed the jury photos of Sean's body in a hole, highlighting the gruesome reality. He emphasized Stanley's inconsistent testimony, changing his story 6 times when questioned about his brother's death. Mageau revealed Stanley sent fake messages from Sean's phone, pretending he was alive. After hours of questioning, Stanley finally admitted to killing Sean during a struggle, claiming he hid the body to protect their mother. McGough argued Stanley's manual infliction of injuries constitutes murder, citing testimony and statements about escalating tensions with Samantha Rowe. Stanley discussed revenge with his brother and friend, mentioning a method of killing, but this evidence was tenuous. Alan Lanter argued a crime requires intent, denied killing his brother, and cited the pathologist's testimony that Sean's death was likely caused by a combination of factors, including a head injury possibly sustained from a fall. Lanter reminded the jury of Donna Eckerd's testimony about Sean's severe mood swings after his illness diagnosis. She also said his death was an accident. Lanter urged jurors to focus on the circumstances leading to Sean's death, not the disturbing photos or Stanley's decision to bury him. Stanley Eckerd is not a murderer, Lanter said. The Eero parents were devastated, having lost 2 sons in one day. The brutal murder of an innocent brother is beyond comprehension. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kendra Hatcher. Kendra Hatcher was born on February 3, 1980, in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois, to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley. Her parents divorced, and her mother later married Bruce Jimon. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Coleman Ashel Lepum, Melissa Jameson, and a brother, Neil Hatcher. Kendra grew up in Pleasant Plains, where she studied dentistry. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to Dallas and started working at Smile Zone, a dental studio. As a devout Christian, Kendra wanted to use her dental skills to help others, providing free services to disadvantaged children at the clinic. In her spare time, Kendra was involved in various activities, including teaching Bible studies and participating in volunteer programs. These programs involved building churches abroad and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. After moving to Dallas, Kendra's professional career took off rapidly. Her personal life also began to blossom when she met Dr. Ricardo Palacios through a dating app on May 24, 2015. Kendra and Ricardo shared similar values, interests, and life goals. Ricardo was completing his dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Despite having only been together for a few months, they were already discussing their upcoming marriage. A tragic incident in a parking lot took the life of Kendra, cutting short all their future plans. Upon arriving at the crime scene, investigators examined the evidence and initially suspected robbery as the motive, given that Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. They found bullet fragments and a gun magazine near her body. However, the circumstances of the shooting and the bullet wounds suggested that robbery was not the primary motive. One bullet struck Kendra in the back, while the other hit her in the head. The entry wound was at the top of her head, and the bullet exited through her chin, indicating that she had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was later confirmed when investigators obtained CCTV footage and reconstructed the events. The footage showed a black Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking lot at 7:15 p.m. 30 minutes later, Kendra returned home and parked in the same garage. Shortly after, a man approached her, shot her, and then ran to the side before jumping into the Jeep and driving off. Although the video quality was poor and the crime scene was not clearly visible, the authorities were unable to identify the assailant. However, they put the vehicle on a wanted list and appealed to the public for assistance. A man named Ortiz contacted the police after recognizing his car and footage related to the shooting. Ortiz claimed that, although the car belonged to him, he was not involved in the shooting and was not driving it at the time. He explained that, on the morning of September 2nd, he had lent his Jeep to 2 of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez, who asked to borrow it until the evening. Later that evening, Brenda called Ortiz to meet her at a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Meanwhile, Crystal Cortez drove the Jeep back to Ortiz's house. When Ortiz saw his Jeep on the TV news, he confronted Brenda, who initially denied that it was his Jeep. then admitted that Crystal had used it without his knowledge. Brenda tried to persuade Ortiz not to report the incident, offering to pay to have the Jeep repainted. At first, Ortiz was hesitant to get involved with the police, fearing it might jeopardize his pending U.S. citizenship. However, he eventually decided to cooperate and provided the police with the names of Brenda and Crystal. The police then tracked the movements of the Jeep on the day of the crime and located the two women. Brenda Delgado was the first to be questioned, but she claimed to have no knowledge of Kendra Hatcher and provided an alibi, stating she was at a restaurant with Ortiz at the time of the crime and produced receipts as proof. However, as the investigation continued, the truth slowly emerged, revealing the attempts by the perpetrators to conceal their involvement. Brenda Delgado came from a modest family. Her parents, Luis and Maria, immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father worked in a factory. Brenda excelled academically and dreamed of attending medical school, but her parents couldn't afford the tuition. After high school, she continued to live with her parents, working as a dental assistant and at a spa, while still aspiring to a more affluent and beautiful life. Brenda balanced her dental assistant job with spa work, where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, she fell for Ricardo at a Jennifer Lopez concert. 3 months later, she moved in with him. Ricardo was smitten, meeting her parents, and Brenda gushed about her love in a Facebook birthday post. Brenda discovered she was pregnant, but Ricardo convinced her to have an abortion, leaving her devastated. After recovering from the ordeal, Brenda focused on her career and her beloved Ricky. She enrolled in Stanford that fall. Although it seemed like Brenda had moved on from the breakup, she was still hurting. Her obsession with Ricardo intensified, and when Ricky posted a photo with his new girlfriend, Kendra, a model-like beauty, Brenda was consumed by dark thoughts. Those close to her claimed she fantasized about harming Kendra. Investigators suspected Brenda had a strong motive to harm her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend, and they had an on-again, off-again relationship from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky met Kendra. Despite this, Ricardo believed he and Brenda remained friends and didn't think there was any bad blood between Brenda and Kendra. The reconstructed events revealed a disturbing picture of how manipulative and ruthless an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado concocted a sinister plan to win back her former lover, Ricardo, and eliminate Kendra Hatcher, the woman he had moved on to. Initially, Brenda posed as Ricardo's supportive friend, pretending to take an interest in his relationship with Kendra. Unbeknownst to Ricardo, she gathered information about their future plans, which he naively believed was genuine concern. After Kendra's death, Ricardo confided in Brenda via text message, pouring out his grief. Brenda feigned sympathy, offering to help him in any way possible. Unaware of her true intentions, Ricardo trusted her completely. What he didn't know was that Brenda had been secretly manipulating him for months. She had been snooping on his mail, learning about his plans with Kendra, including their travel arrangements. This discovery fueled her anger, and she became fixated on eliminating Kendra, whom she believed had usurped her place in Ricardo's life. Brenda took control of Ricardo's phone account and used it to stalk him, keeping close tabs on his activities and those of his girlfriend Kendra. This obsession soon became her sole purpose in life. Brenda's fixation on stalking eventually led her to quit her job and dedicate all her time to achieving her twisted goals. Over time, she devised a cruel and terrifying plan to murder Kendra and take her place beside Ricardo. To put her plan into action, Brenda approached several acquaintances with an offer to harm Kendra in exchange for money. She eventually found a 21-year-old single mother, Crystal Cortez, who was struggling financially and willing to assist her. Crystal recruited a perpetrator, Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Brenda paid Crystal $500 and provided her with illegal substances, which Crystal then passed on to Christopher. Several women were tasked with following Kendra to learn her daily routines and identify the best location and time to carry out the crime. On September 2nd, 2015, they borrowed Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher lay in wait for Kendra in the parking lot, but lost their nerve and didn't follow her home from work due to fear of getting stuck in traffic. Later that evening, they finally carried out their sinister plan and were rewarded for their efforts. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were arrested. They both denied any involvement in the crime and claimed they were not at the scene. However, when the police found the murder weapon in the car, Love's story fell apart. Meanwhile, Crystal's alibi was inconsistent and confusing. At first, she claimed she was driving in the parking lot because an armed carjacker had taken over her SUV and forced her there. She even falsely stated that her young son was with her, but surveillance cameras showed no evidence of a child. As the investigation continued and more evidence emerged, Crystal changed her story again, this time offering to cooperate with the police in exchange for a reduced sentence. She implicated Brenda, claiming that she was the mastermind behind the crime and that they had been planning it for 2 weeks. According to Crystal, Brenda's obsession with winning back her ex-boyfriend, Ricardo, drove her to despise Kendra, whom she believed had taken her place. Brenda had pretended to be happy for Ricardo, but her life was actually unraveling. According to Crystal, Brenda decided to get rid of Kendra Hatcher at this point. In Crystal's testimony, she detailed how Brenda devised a plan to kill Kendra, enlisting her support. Brenda and Crystal started formulating a plan to kill Kendra, meeting several times and developing multiple plans. Initially, they planned to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then dispose of her body. However, to avoid suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around rough neighborhoods, asking people if they could help, which led them to Christopher Love, who agreed to help and participated in deciding the method of the crime. The three of them decided that shooting Kendra would be the quickest way to kill her. Crystal cooperated with authorities, revealing September 2nd wasn't a random choice. Brenda knew Kendra and Ricardo were going to Mexico, so they decided to kill Kendra before their trip. They wanted it to look like a botched robbery. Brenda and Crystal tracked Kendra's movements for days, noting her activities minute by minute. They traced her route home and entered the apartment complex's parking garage on September 1st, 2015, to set up the crime. Brenda and Crystal made a final check on the day of the crime. They picked up the Jeep and Christopher, dropping Brenda at the library to establish an alibi. Crystal and Christopher waited near Kendra's apartment, then followed her, losing her in traffic. They waited at her house, and when she arrived, Christopher shot her. Crystal claimed she didn't see it but heard the shot. She drove Christopher home, picked up her son, and returned the Jeep to Jose. Brenda's plan had finally come to fruition. She had eliminated her rival, and all she had to do was wait for a message from her beloved Ricardo. Brenda was thrilled to have committed the perfect crime. However, Crystal's subsequent confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about her guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. When the police arrived with the warrant, Brenda was no longer at home, having fled to Mexico using her dual citizenship. Brenda's involvement in a contract killing came to light after she fled, and on April 6, 2016, she was placed on the FBI's wanted list. With a $100,000 reward offered for information about her, she became the 9th woman to ever be listed among the most wanted fugitives, and the only woman on the list at the time. However, her freedom was short-lived, as she was apprehended just 2 days later in Torreon, Coahuila, by Mexican authorities, who extradited her to the United States on October 6, but only on the condition that she would not face the death penalty. Brenda was charged with capital murder in the U.S. At her 2017 Texas trial, relatives of Kendra and Ricardo spoke out. Witnesses testified, confirming Brenda's intentions and obsession with her ex. Her cousin Moses revealed Brenda's depression and her attempt to hire him to hurt Kendra. Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo, said friend Jennifer Escobar. Brenda read Ricardo's emails, tracked his movements, and had his house key and bank access. She asked Jennifer to kill or disable Kendra Hatcher, offering $2,000, a car, and drugs. Jennifer refused after consulting her parents. In court, multiple people who knew Brenda testified about her obsession, and it was established that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She viewed Kendra as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, specifically reuniting with Ricky. In the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda's obsession grew increasingly intense, as corroborated by evidence presented in court. This evidence included an ATM withdrawal receipt for $500, which Brenda later gave to Crystal as payment for her role, as well as a $600 cash payment received by Christopher Love. Furthermore, cell phone records revealed that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together before the crime, with over 99 calls exchanged between Brenda and Crystal between August 22nd and September 4th, demonstrating their frequent communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. Despite an alibi and receipts showing she was at a restaurant, the jury quickly found her guilty of Kendra Hatcher's murder. Delgado was sentenced to life without parole. Crystal Cortez, who cooperated with the investigation and pleaded guilty, received a 35-year prison sentence with parole eligibility. The Hatcher family expressed satisfaction with the court's decision and quietly left the courtroom following the verdict. On the other hand, the Delgado family, who knew Brenda as a loving daughter and woman with strong Christian values, refused to believe she was involved until the end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Borden family. Michael and Catherine met in school, bonding over homework and walks. They became inseparable friends, sharing secrets and learning from each other. Their friendship blossomed into romance, and Michael eventually asked Catherine on a date, declaring his love. They got married in a beautiful ceremony, vowing to love each other through life's ups and downs. After 10 years, the Borden family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania, a peaceful town founded by the Moravian Church in 1756. The town's faithful residents, including Amish families, sought refuge from modern chaos, living simply and avoiding modern tech. The devout Bordens chose Lititz for its ideal setting to raise children, surrounded by calm and serenity. Michael was an active member of the local church community, where he taught Sunday school lessons. His wife Catherine managed the household and supported him in his community work. While he focused on spiritual growth, Michael also worked as a manager at a printing company to provide for their everyday needs. Over time, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Large families like theirs were common in Lititz, where parents hoped to protect their children from the outside world's hardships and dangers. Regular church attendance, youth groups, and homeschooling were a big part of family life. Interactions between families were mostly limited to religious gatherings and celebrations. Michael and his wife built a peaceful home life, raising their kids in faith and discipline. When their eldest sons left for university, the 3 younger kids continued homeschooling, pleasing their parents. Neighbors and friends praised the kind, responsive, and interesting kids: Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel. Kara, the eldest daughter, challenged traditional values in her teens. Despite her dad's disapproval, she joined the soccer team, snuck out to discos, and did forbidden things. Her dad was troubled, and talks often ended in arguments and her running away. Kara sought romantic relationships and showed interest in boys. In 2005, David, 18, and Kara, 14, connected at a homeschooling support group. They formed a close bond, hiding it from their parents, and used social media to exchange messages, pouring their hearts out. They crafted coded messages to keep their communication private. Kara and David's letter exchange wasn't enough, so they secretly met in person. At first, they took innocent walks, but their friendship blossomed into romance. They snuck out to discos, spending nights together. David, older, had experienced first love, while Kara's inexperience made her feelings overwhelming. Her joy was radiant, but her obedience to her parents was feigned. driven by fear of discovery. But sooner or later, every secret is exposed. One day, Kara couldn't keep her secret hidden anymore and confided in her sister. She showed her a photo of David, told her about how they met and how they were deeply in love and willing to overcome all obstacles to be together. They were even planning to run away to be together. However, Kara's sister was worried about her and told their mother about their planned elopement, which ultimately revealed the secret of the young lovers. One early morning, Kara snuck back home, feeling elated after her date with David. But her mother was waiting in her room, clearly aware of her secret. At breakfast, Kara's parents forbade her from seeing David, deeming him unsuitable due to their concerns about violence and drugs. Angry and disappointed, Kara's father grounded her. That night, Kara spent her free time at David's house. At 5:30 a.m., David drove Kara back to her neighborhood and dropped her off near her house. They agreed that once Kara was safely back in her room, she would send him a text message to let him know she was okay. However, the message never came. David tried calling her home phone several times and sent her a few messages on social media, but he didn't hear back from her. An hour later, Kara finally got in touch with him, explaining that she had gotten caught by her parents and asked him to come over so they could talk to him. David arrived on time, but Kara's parents were fiercely opposed. Her dad forbade David from seeing Kara, deeming her too young for a relationship. David's declarations of love fell flat, with her dad threatening to call the police if he saw them together again. The emotional confrontation ended with Kara grounded and David leaving, feeling rejected and heartbroken for the first time. The lovers' separation was agonizing. They devised a plan to deceive everyone by pretending to break up while secretly continuing their affair. In public, they convincingly played the part of former lovers, not even greeting each other. Kara's parents were convinced they'd protected her from a youthful mistake. However, David missed Kara terribly, often reading Shakespeare and imagining openly serenading her like Romeo. David Ludwig took drastic measures by calling Kara's home to request a meeting with her father, Michael. On November 13, 2015, the young man arrived at the Borden residence, determined to discuss their plans to get married. Ludwig confessed his love for Kara and their intentions to Michael, but he received a dismissive response, saying it would never happen. Prepared for this reaction, Ludwig, fueled by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he walked towards the front door. Next, he targeted Kara's mother, Catherine, shooting her while she sat in a chair. Ludwig then searched the house for Kara, calling out her name, but she was nowhere to be found. He got into his car, started the engine, and began to drive away. That's when he spotted Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car, expressing her desire to escape and start a new life with David. They fled the city in David's red car, leaving the chaos behind. Kara Borden was missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found dead. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, which led them to track the teenagers. The footage also showed that Kara didn't resist and had willingly gone with David Ludwig. As a result, the charges against Ludwig for abducting Kara were dropped. Alerts were issued to police across the East, including in Pennsylvania and Indiana, as the couple was spotted heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching the description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. Police rushed to the area, but the car was already gone. State police were alerted, and they spotted the car around noon on Interstate 70 in Belleville. David Ludwig got onto the interstate, leading police on a high-speed chase at 90 to 95 miles per hour on a two-lane highway. According to State Trooper David Cooch, who was involved in the pursuit, Ludwig drove extremely recklessly and dangerously, causing multiple accidents, much like in an action movie. The district attorney announced that, despite the initial kidnapping charge being dropped, they would still face charges for the brutal murder of Michael and Catherine Borden. David Ludwig and Kara Beth Borden went on the run following the tragic incident, evading authorities for approximately 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. While Kara Beth was not charged with any crime, David Ludwig was detained without bail, facing charges of murder and abduction. In the aftermath, Kara was taken in by relatives and church members for care. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, following a high-speed chase that ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the murder of the Bordens, a crime allegedly committed after a prolonged dispute. Ludwig confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that he had deliberately intended to shoot the Bordens if they got in his way, and that he did so. During a search of his vehicle after his arrest, no weapons were found. However, when the police searched his home, they discovered an arsenal of 54 firearms, which belonged to his father, a hunter who had taught Ludwig how to handle weapons. The police also found an 18-minute video on a laptop in his home, which showed Ludwig discussing plans to invade another family's home, armed with weapons. The plan was abandoned due to the presence of too many cars. Although the police declared Kara Borden a victim in the case, Ludwig claimed that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove that she was not abducted. He did not resist extradition to Pennsylvania, and a judge ordered him held without bail. Ludwig was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation, and a preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of Ludwig, who was responsible for the deaths of 2 adults in front of their children, was brief, as detailed in court documents. Caitlin, Kara's 13-year-old sister, told investigators that her parents were killed after arguing with David Ludwig for about an hour. According to Caitlin, Ludwig shot her father, and she then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, which likely killed her mother. Afterwards, Ludwig ran through the house, calling out to Kara. In June 2006, David Ludwig agreed to a plea deal with District Attorney Donald R. Totaro, who had originally sought the death penalty. As a result, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Kara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by legal counsel. In November 2005, it was reported that the charge of abduction against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Kara had voluntarily left with Ludwig, as supported by written statements. Ludwig's lawyer claimed that Kara had accompanied David voluntarily during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance footage showed that she had multiple opportunities to escape. Kara herself admitted that she had run after Ludwig as he left her house. Kara Beth Borden was identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and as a result, the Lancaster County District Attorney did not file criminal charges against her. This decision was influenced by her actions during the investigation and the digital evidence collected from emails, blogs, and texts exchanged with Ludwig. A memorial service was held at Lancaster Bible College, where Kara Beth, surrounded by her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. As a sign of respect and remembrance, the neighborhood adorned their mailboxes with white ribbons. This tragedy left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. David Ludwig was transferred to Indiana's State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove to serve his life sentence for murdering his girlfriend's parents. He was chosen for the prison's youthful offender program, designed for inmates 15 to 20, which focuses on teaching self-responsibility, discipline, and respect for others. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 life sentences for fatally shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in 2005 after they barred him from seeing their 14-year-old daughter. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling against life imprisonment for minors, but the PA Supreme Court denied his petition, agreeing with a lower court that he's not entitled to same consideration since he was 18 at the time. David Ludwig will spend life in prison. The community struggled to understand how well-raised kids committed evil. Despite Christian homeschooling, tragedy struck, leaving questions if parents overlooked or failed to convey values. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne Baldelli was born on June 30th, 1969, in a small town in Southern California. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Marjorie and James Fold, with 2 older siblings, Michael and Michelle. Yvonne was especially close to her sister Michelle from a young age. Tragedy struck when Yvonne was 13, with the loss of her mother after a long illness. Her father James remarried a year later to Lillian, who turned out to be a kind and caring stepmother. Yvonne and her siblings developed a wonderful relationship with Lillian, who treated them as her own. Yvonne pursued a good education and experimented with various career paths, but her true passion lay in fashion design. She dreamed of turning her hobby into a successful business. However, her personal life was marked by misfortune. She had 2 failed marriages, the last one ending in divorce from Kevin Baldelli in 2007. Adding to her woes, Yvonne underwent surgery in her youth, which was followed by complications that left her unable to have children. After her second divorce, Yvonne lived a solitary life in her small apartment, where her only constant companion was her beloved dog, whom she lovingly referred to as her child. Despite her challenges, Yvonne remained close to her family, calling her father and sister daily and making it a point to visit them at least once a month. In 2009, as Yvonne was approaching her 40th birthday, she met Brian Brimager, a married Marine with a young son. Despite being committed, Brian was open to an extramarital affair and confided in Yvonne about his unhappy marriage, stating that his only reason for not filing for divorce was the welfare of his child. Yvonne was taken by Brian's fit appearance and believed him. Having had a loveless marriage, she knew it was tough to leave, especially with kids. She didn't pressure him, thinking his child was the main issue. Little did she know, Brian was a charming liar, using his looks to juggle multiple relationships and fake promises. It became clear that Brimager, who was married, was having an affair with not 1, but 2 women. One of them was Yvonne, and the other was Christine Verhoeven, a beautiful blonde with many influential contacts. Christine worked as an analyst at the White House. When Yvonne found out that her lover, Brian, was cheating on his wife with another woman, she decided to take action. Gathering her courage, she called Brian's wife to inform her that her husband was having an affair, not only with her, but also with another woman. This shocking news sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult decision. In the end, he chose Yvonne, although it's possible that she influenced his decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with Yvonne. At the time, he was still serving in the Marines, but he had been thinking about ending his military career for a while. They seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's family remained skeptical of her new partner, questioning the sincerity of his feelings for her. In the summer of 2011, Brian started talking about making drastic changes to his life, including leaving the Marines, moving away from the city, and settling down on a tropical island. Yvonne shared his vision, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever he chose to go. She believed she had found the love of her life and adored him. By September, Yvonne decided to move to Panama's Carino Island, a tropical haven. Her dream was to open a boutique, creating custom outfits for tourists. In early September, Yvonne, Brian, and her dog flew to Panama, then took a ferry to Carino Island, renting an oceanfront house. The island's hot and humid climate attracted tourists, especially divers and surfers, year-round. Brian, a skilled guitar player since his teenage years, brought his instrument to the island with the intention of launching a music career, performing at various entertainment venues. Soon after settling in, he established connections with several local bar owners, and one of them offered him a gig. He would play in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, and as a token of appreciation, the audience would often buy him drinks, leading to a habit of heavy daily drinking. Yvonne's business, on the other hand, struggled to take off, with sluggish sales and meager profits. However, she persevered and found work at one of the bars. She also adopted a second dog, which she found on the island, and decided to keep. She maintained daily contact with her sister Michelle Valenzuela, sharing every detail, but her messages became increasingly brief and somber, causing concern among her family. Initially, the island seemed like a paradise to they. Yvonne had hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic beach wedding. However, as time passed, Brian showed no signs of rushing into marriage. Their relationship quickly began to deteriorate. In early December, Michelle became concerned when she stopped receiving messages from her sister Yvonne. Then, on December 14, 2011, Michelle received an unexpected call from Yvonne's boyfriend Brian. He asked when he could come by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in Michelle's garage before he and Yvonne had traveled to Panama. This call surprised Michelle because it meant Brian had returned to the US. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even reached out? Brian told Michelle that he had explained everything in an email he had sent a few days earlier. He also claimed that Yvonne had sent Michelle a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing. So, she turned to her email and discovered two unread messages, one from her sister Yvonne and one from Brian. Brian claimed in his message that Yvonne had left him for a new lover and moved to Costa Rica. However, a message supposedly from Yvonne stated that she had left him after discovering his infidelity and that another woman, Christine Verhoeven, had given birth to his child. This message also claimed that Yvonne had met someone new and gone to Costa Rica with him. It seemed believable at first, especially since Yvonne was unable to have children, and news of her partner's infidelity could have been devastating. However, Yvonne was not one to act impulsively, and it was unusual that she hadn't contacted her sister to discuss her situation. The tone of the message from Yvonne also raised suspicions as it didn't sound like her previous communications. Michelle suggested filing a missing persons report for Yvonne, but Brian was hesitant, claiming she was fine and capable of taking care of herself. He insisted she would come home on her own, but his nervousness and quick departure after picking up his vehicle raised suspicions. Shortly after, a message from Yvonne's phone arrived, stating she would return home in January for their father's birthday. This brought Michelle some relief, and she decided to wait, hoping Yvonne would come back as planned. By mid-January, Yvonne remained missing and hadn't reached out. Meanwhile, Michelle was stunned to learn that Brian had unexpectedly married Christine Verhoeven shortly before the new year began. What made this even more surprising was that he had only parted ways with his previous girlfriend a few weeks earlier. Michelle's concern for her sister's safety prompted her to report Yvonne missing to the police, as she suspected Yvonne hadn't actually gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry to Panama confirmed her fears, verifying that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Michelle's cousin, a programmer, helped trace the IP address of the emails supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December. The investigation revealed that the emails were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. As the situation grew increasingly alarming, Michelle quickly informed the police of her discovery. Valenzuela then reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and continued to send messages from her phone and email, impersonating her for about a month. Although there wasn't enough concrete evidence to arrest Brian at the time, law enforcement interviewed him and continued gathering proof of his guilt. It was discovered that Brian had asked Christine to marry him while he was still in Panama with Yvonne, promising they would soon return and raise their daughter together. However, Christine was not aware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on a business trip. 2 months after Yvonne's disappearance, her sister and niece conducted their own investigation and flew to Panama, where they sought the help of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator, who specialized in finding missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events Brian had given. After listening to them, Winter immediately expressed his concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were low. With his extensive experience in such investigations and using his connections, Winter decided to pressure the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning Yvonne's disappearance into international news. A press conference was also organized, which included Yvonne's family members. After arriving in Panama, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends joined the search for Brian Baldelli and assisted in the investigation. Together, they thoroughly searched the tropical island of Carino, but found no trace of him. The dense undergrowth and swampy marshes, which were home to a wide variety of wildlife, hindered their search efforts. The family also questioned the island's residents about their knowledge of Brian and Yvonne and what they could reveal about the couple's behavior. It became clear that Brian and Yvonne had been drinking excessively and frequently got into loud public arguments, disregarding those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars, drinking and arguing. Moreover, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body, and she rarely removed her sunglasses, seemingly to conceal the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house they rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residents. Meanwhile, FBI agents brought in a specialized team of divers to search the waters surrounding the island for potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches also yielded no results. From the start, Brian was the main suspect in the case, but there was no solid evidence to charge him with. He repeatedly denied any involvement, sticking to the same story that his ex-partner Yvonne had run off with another man. It wasn't until September 21, 2012, that Brian was finally questioned by the police and a search of his home was conducted. At that time, his wife Christine was at work and Brian was unemployed, staying at home to take care of their child and enjoying his favorite hobby, playing golf. Brian claimed Yvonne left him after discovering his child with another woman, but became anxious when police found Yvonne's laptop on his table. The laptop had messages sent after she supposedly left, including a photo of Yvonne with a bruise and a conversation between Brian and his mistress about their secret affair. The search history showed queries about cleaning bloodstains and removing blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, as neither Aon's body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Aon didn't definitively prove his guilt. However, a discovery by Don Winter shed more light on the case. Before leaving Panama, Brimminger had sold a machete he owned to a buyer online. During their conversation, he jokingly said he had used the weapon once to finish off a stripper. Although the machete was seized for examination, it didn't initially yield any conclusive evidence. The long-awaited arrest was still pending. Meanwhile, the police had overlooked a crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance to make it seem like she was still alive. Before returning to the US, Brian went to Costa Rica and used the missing woman's card a few times, creating the illusion that she had fled there. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, eventually draining the card before discarding it. However, Brian didn't realize that he was caught on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. In July 2013, a year and a half after the woman vanished, her relatives, armed with evidence collected by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally succeeded in getting Brian arrested. At first, he was held on charges of lying and obstructing the investigation, as there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with anything more serious at that time. By then, Christine had given birth to a second son just a week before his arrest, making Brian a father for the second time. The authorities tried to have an open conversation with the suspect, offering him the opportunity to admit to the crime and reveal the location of Yvonne's body. However, Brian consistently denied any involvement. His lawyer also claimed that since there was no body or direct evidence linking Brian to Yvonne's disappearance, there was no proof of his guilt. In the swamp on the island of Quinero, a worker stumbled upon a gruesome discovery just 2 months after Brian's arrest. While taking a shortcut through the underbrush, the worker spotted an army backpack partially submerged in the water. Curious about what might be inside, the worker opened the bag, only to be met with horror at the sight of a human skull. The worker immediately notified the police, who responded and took the backpack into custody for further examination. Inside, they found fragments of a human body, as well as the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been deliberately dismembered, placed in the bag, and discarded in a remote area, likely intended to never be found. DNA testing later confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne. However, many of her limbs were missing. Further examination by pathologists revealed that Yvonne had suffered a brutal beating before her death, including a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. When the unique chot marks on the victim's bones were matched to the machete's blade, it confirmed that the body had been dismembered with this weapon, as each blade has a distinct signature, similar to human fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. In 2014, Michelle Valenzuela got a cancer diagnosis and after 6 months of intense treatment, realized it was futile. She dedicated her last months to seeking justice for her sister, testifying against Brian and submitting evidence to the court despite her weakening health. Brian assaulted Yvonne in a drunken rage after she discovered his affair, stabbing her to death. He then dismembered her body, killing her dogs, and hid the parts in a backpack in a swamp. Brian fabricated a story about Yvonne leaving him, gaining sympathy from locals, and even found a new girlfriend. However, during the trial, his girlfriend testified against him, and he was forced to admit his guilt, claiming self-defense despite evidence showing he was fully aware of his actions. In the spring of 2016, Brian was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2035. At sentencing, credit was given for his prior service in the Marines, which spared him from a life sentence. Meanwhile, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, maintained her husband's innocence and pledged to stand by him no matter what. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Anna Walsh. Anna Luic, later known as Anna O'Neill, was born on April 18, 1983 in Belgrade, Serbia. She grew up in a cultured family with her younger sister. At the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, Anna excelled as a standout student. She then attended Belgrade Research University, the most historic and expansive university in Serbia. Anna pursued foreign languages, earning a master's degree in French language and literature at 22. With her diploma, Anna sought a new chapter in the United States, fully supported by her family. In 2005, she settled in the U.S., aiming to further her education in hospitality management. She took administrative roles at prestigious hotels, including the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia. Anna's warm approach, sense of duty, and conflict resolution skills quickly earned her respect from peers and supervisors. Multilingual and charming, she formed connections easily. Beloved by colleagues and friends, Anna seized every chance to shine. She became a U.S. citizen, retaining her Serbian nationality, and enjoyed a high income, investing in property and a car. Her travels further broadened her horizons, and her career flourished, leading to a promotion to senior manager. Anna's captivating qualities, including her intelligence, beauty, slender physique, and radiant smile, drew in numerous admirers. While working at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts, she met and fell in love with Marcus O'Neill, the hotel's head chef. Their romance ultimately led to their marriage in 2009, at which point Anna took her husband's last name. Born in July 1975 in Boston, Massachusetts, Brian Paul Walsh came from a prominent, wealthy, and respected family. As a young man, he would frequently borrow money from friends, only to fail to repay them. During his college years, he would invite friends to dine at upscale restaurants, then use various tactics to manipulate others into covering his share of the bill. Brian was estranged from his father, Dr. Thomas Walsh, for many years until the elder's death in 2018. The estrangement dated back to when Brian fraudulently withdrew nearly $1 million from his father's personal account and disappeared with the money. Despite this, Dr. Walsh chose not to report the incident to the police and instead tried to persuade Brian to return the money voluntarily. However, when Brian refused, Dr. Walsh cut off all communication with him. By the time of the theft, Brian's parents had already divorced and his father had started a new family. In response to Brian's actions, Dr. Walsh decided to remove him from his life and will. After Dr. Walsh's passing, Brian reappeared and filed a lawsuit claiming that the will was forged by the doctor's widow and younger children to deny him his rightful inheritance. However, Brian was unable to prove his claims and received no part of the estate. Those who knew Brian described him as greedy, malevolent, and cruel, with a tendency towards violence and a lack of emotional control. He often relied on force to achieve his goals and became dangerous during bouts of anger. In the late 2000s, Brian received treatment in a psychiatric clinic to address his rage issues, during which he was officially diagnosed with sociopathy. Brian and Anna first met in 2014 when Anna was working as a senior reservation manager at the Wheatle Hotel in Massachusetts. At the time, she was married to Marcus O'Neill, who was also employed at the hotel. Brian, who was a guest at the hotel, was immediately drawn to Anna's charm. Despite knowing she was already married, Brian continued to show her increasing attention, which eventually became insistent. Used to getting his way, Brian persisted in pursuing Anna, even after she rejected him. He managed to get her phone number and home address where she lived with her husband and began to harass them relentlessly. In 2015, the Anna were forced to seek police protection from Brian's constant harassment, which continued day and night. Brian would show up at Anna's workplace, call her at home, and send her messages, demanding she leave her husband for him. The situation took a dark turn when Brian threatened to harm Anna and her husband if she didn't comply with his demands. What triggered Anna's change of heart remains unclear, but a year after seeking police protection, she unexpectedly divorced her husband. Months later, Brian became her second husband. They settled into a luxurious home in Quezon, Massachusetts, an upscale neighborhood about 20 miles southeast of Boston. They had 3 sons in quick succession, with the boys being 2, 4, and 6 years old at the time of Anna's disappearance. Despite having a demanding job, Anna successfully balanced her career with motherhood, never taking maternity leave. She became the regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a real estate company, earning a high salary and becoming the primary breadwinner for the family. Due to her frequent business trips to Washington, D.C., she also bought a second home in her name, where she stayed during these trips. To help take care of their children during her absences, Anna relied on visiting nannies. Meanwhile, Brian was unemployed while his wife was building their family and advancing her career. He had spent most of the $1 million he had taken from his father, and all of Anna's acquisitions were registered in her name. As a result, Brian was actively searching for ways to generate effortless income. Before marrying Anna, Brian had formed a connection with a wealthy individual in South Korea, whose family possessed an impressive art collection. After returning to the U.S., Brian maintained this connection and was unexpectedly asked by his friend to assist in selling several Andy Warhol paintings. Instead of just earning a commission, Brian decided to profit from the transaction. He gained access to a series of abstract Warhol paintings titled Shadow and appraised each one, obtaining authenticity certificates. Then, he created copies of both the paintings and documents. Brian found artists who could create precise replicas, convincing them he needed backups, since each original was worth around $250,000. For several years, he successfully sold fake paintings as originals to collectors worldwide. However, one buyer, an expert in Andy Warhol's work, quickly identified a forgery and sued Brian. The FBI investigated, and in April 2021, Brian pleaded guilty to selling counterfeit art. He was placed under house arrest after his lawyer negotiated a deal, requiring him to return the proceeds to the buyers and avoid prison time. Brian was under house arrest, but he was allowed to leave his house twice a day for specific activities. He could drive his children to and from school and had a 2.5-hour window in the morning to visit a limited list of approved places in his neighborhood, such as stores, pharmacies, and dry cleaners, to buy essential items. On December 31st, 2022, Mrs. Anna Walsh mysteriously disappeared. The Walsh family had planned to celebrate New Year's Eve together at home, just the five of them, Anna, Brian, and their three young sons. After the boys went to bed early, Anna and Brian stayed at the dinner table. That evening, Anna posted a message on social media, wishing everyone a happy new year, and hinting that the past year had been tough, but she and Brian were still together. Anna was scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. for work on January 3rd, but when she failed to show up, her employer Tishman Speyer reported her missing to the police on January 4th. Brian also reported her missing, worried that he hadn't been able to contact her for days. According to Brian, he last saw Anna on January 1st when she woke him up early in the morning, claiming she had to go to work due to some issues and her boss had asked her to come in earlier than planned. He believed she then headed to the airport with only a few belongings. However, several inconsistencies in the case soon arose. For instance, Anna had not bought, changed, or reserved a flight ticket for January 1st, and she had not canceled her scheduled flight for January 3rd. Additionally, she was not seen at the airport on either January 1st or 3rd. Furthermore, it was unclear how she left the house since her personal car was still in the garage and she had not called a taxi. Brian's suggestion that she might have hitchhiked was not convincing. Brian's statements and behavior sparked numerous questions. His explanations were contradictory, and he didn't appear particularly concerned about the unfolding events. Despite being unable to contact the mother of his children for over 3 days, he only reported her missing on the 4th day, and only after her workplace called. From the start, Mr. Walsh was considered a prime suspect, yet law enforcement didn't have enough evidence to arrest him or obtain a warrant to search their family home. They conducted a limited inspection with the homeowner's permission, but it didn't yield any results. Brian claimed to have led a normal life during those 3 days, visiting usual stores and doing household chores. However, verifying his claims was challenging, as he often left the house without his phone, which he alleged was frequently taken by his older children to play games without his permission. On January 5th, the police issued a public appeal on TV, showing a photo of Anna and asking anyone who knew her whereabouts or what had happened to her to contact the authorities immediately. However, no one came forward with any information. The last time Anna had been in touch with anyone was on December 31st, when she made phone calls to her mother and sister. Her husband was the last person known to have seen her. Surveillance cameras in the neighborhood did not capture any footage of Anna on the morning of January 1st, making it seem as though she had never left her home. In contrast, her husband was recorded leaving and returning to their home several times, but it was impossible to determine where he had gone. His claim of visiting a supermarket was proven to be false, as his vehicle was not seen on any routes to the store, and he was not spotted inside. It wasn't until January 8th that Brian was arrested for making false statements and was taken in for questioning at the police station. His home was finally searched, and it was discovered that on January 1st, he had visited a hardware store in a different area, which was not on the list of approved locations he was allowed to visit while under house arrest. At the hardware store, Brian spent nearly $500 on a large quantity of cleaning supplies, including plastic sheeting, duct tape, a mop and bucket, and utility rags. He paid in cash, likely hoping to keep his visit secret. During a search of the Walsh family home, disturbing discoveries were made. Although the house appeared normal at first, with no signs of struggle or bloodstains, the basement told a different story. Law enforcement officers found smeared bloodstains everywhere, along with a bloodied knife and saw wrapped in towels, hidden among the clutter. Brian had previously admitted to visiting his mother's home on January 3rd, claiming he needed to help her with household tasks due to her poor health. However, after the grim discoveries in the basement, police suspected that Walsh may have disposed of evidence or parts of his deceased wife's body on his way there. They inspected trash bins in the area where the couple lived, as well as along the road to his mother's house, and found a kitchen hatchet with dried blood and several blood-stained towels, similar to those found in the Walsh basement. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood in the basement on the towels, knife, hatchet, and saw belonged to Anna, confirming her death. The seized laptop and tablet revealed a disturbing search history. Weeks prior to his wife's disappearance, Brian had been actively searching online for information on the most favorable states for divorce in terms of property division. He also looked into whether he could claim the second home in Washington, D.C., which was owned by Anna and registered solely in her name, suggesting a possible motive for the crime. One of the earliest searches, made around 4 a.m. on January 1st, was about how long it takes for a body to decompose. This was followed by nearly 24 searches on how to dispose of a body, including how to clean up blood traces, how to dismember a body, and whether a body could be identified if the teeth were removed. He also searched for information on how long DNA traces last and whether a person could be charged with a crime if the body was never found. All of these searches were conducted on his young child's tablet. By January 3rd, Brian's searches had shifted to inheritance, as he looked into how and when someone can inherit the property of a person who has disappeared. This suggests that he was confident he would avoid punishment and was preparing to claim the inheritance. On January 18th, Brian was officially accused of murdering his wife, even though her body or remains had not been discovered. Prosecutors allege that on New Year's Day, Brian intentionally or accidentally killed his wife, then decided to get rid of her body by dismembering it in their home's basement. He allegedly put the body parts in plastic bags and threw them away in trash cans located in different areas of the city. The area surrounding the Walsh home, as well as nearby empty lands, wooded areas, and bodies of water, were extensively searched for evidence, but nothing was found. The defendant, Brian Walsh, has pleaded not guilty and is refusing to reveal what happened to Anna's body. Recently, Anna had been unhappy and was considering divorcing her husband, which she mentioned several times during phone calls with her mother and sister the day before she vanished. However, her mother did not take Anna's threats seriously and decided to put off her visit. The trial is ongoing, and Brian is being held at the Norfolk Correctional Facility as he awaits his next court date. Anna's mother is following the investigation from her home in Serbia and has not traveled to the United States. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has contacted the New York consulate, which is in touch with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to ensure Anna's mother is kept informed about the investigation and hearings. Brian and Anna's 3 sons are now in state custody because none of Brian's family members are willing to care for them. They cite Anna's mother's age and poor health, and her sister, who lives in Canada, has also declined to take in her nephews. The only person willing to take the boys in is Pamela Bond, a close friend of Anna's, who prefers this to them being separated and placed in different foster homes. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska, to George and Susan Loof. She spent her childhood in Arcadia with her parents until 2000, when the family moved to Ney, where her mother worked as a special education teacher and her father was the school principal. Growing up, Sydney was an energetic and outdoor-oriented girl who loved nature. Her father, George, often took her fishing during her school years. She was also involved in sports, playing basketball and golf, where she showed promise. However, she developed scoliosis, which forced her to give up many of her favorite activities and ended her sports career. After graduating from high school in 2011, Sydney found employment at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. Despite moving from Norfolk to Lincoln for work, Sydney remained close to her family, who made an effort to stay in touch almost daily and regularly met for dinner. Although she lived independently, Sydney frequently returned to her parents' house. Sydney had been battling depression, feeling that the medications she was on were actually making her condition worse. Her mom, Susie, was deeply concerned and urged her to see a new doctor, who prescribed different medications. During phone calls with her mom, Sydney's voice sounded increasingly optimistic as she reported that her mental state was improving. She was attempting to make positive changes in her life, including searching for a new job, as working in a store didn't fulfill her ambitions. However, she was still uncertain about her career goals, which contributed to her feelings of depression. By November 2017, Sydney's mental health had taken a turn for the worse, leading her to take antidepressants and occasionally smoke marijuana. Despite her family and friends offering support, she yearned for romance and love. As a young modern woman with an interest in the same gender, Sydney sometimes turned to social media to find potential dates. To expand her social circle and find a friend, she used Tinder, a popular dating app. In November 2017, Sydney met a man named Aubrey online, and they started exchanging messages. They quickly discovered they had a lot in common, including a love for gambling, hiking, and good food. After just 100 messages, they decided to meet in person on November 14th. Sydney visited Aubrey at his home in Wilbur, and their first meeting went really well. They hit it off and agreed to meet again the following day at Aubrey's house. Before their second meeting, Sydney worked her shift at the store, went home, and got ready. She even took a photo of herself and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." When Aubrey arrived, they drove off together. The next day, however, Sydney failed to show up for work, which was unusual for the normally reliable Sydney. Despite her high spirits in the days leading up to her disappearance, her family was worried when her coworkers informed them that she hadn't shown up. Sydney's mother, Susie, revealed that her daughter had been struggling with anxiety and depression in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sydney had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Sydney's family saw her. When Sydney's parents went to her apartment, they were extremely surprised to find that she had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike the caring pet owner they knew Sydney to be. Concerned, they reported Sydney missing to the police. During a welfare check of Sydney's home, the police found the apartment locked and saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, the family remained adamant that something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, Sydney Loof was reported missing after failing to arrive at her workplace, the Menards store showroom on 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney had a spinal condition that affected her gait, making her stand out in a crowd. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. According to her parents, Sydney told her friend on Snapchat on Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a man she met online the previous night and planned to meet up with her again that evening. Her car was found in Northeast Lincoln, and police conducted interviews, searching for any leads that could help locate Sydney. A massive search effort was launched to find Sydney, featuring highway billboards with her photo and a televised manhunt. Susie remained adamant that something had happened to her daughter after her date. To support her claim, she shared a screenshot of a Snapchat post by Sydney, captioned, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was planning to meet a woman named Aubrey, whom she met on Tinder. During the investigation, police examined Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from her workplace, which led them to identify a key person of interest. They traced Sydney's last phone signal to a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, likely close to Aubrey's residence, although they had no information about Aubrey's identity at the time. Authorities started looking for a man named Aubrey, who was the last person to see Sydney before she went missing. The problem was that no one knew Aubrey's real identity or if he even existed. Sydney's friend Brooklyn took matters into her own hands and decided to track down Aubrey using Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Aubrey's profile, and exchanged phone numbers with him. This allowed the police to finally learn Aubrey's real name, which was Bailey Boswell, a 26-year-old woman. Further investigation revealed that Bailey lived in an apartment near the cell tower where Sydney's phone was last connected. Bailey shared this apartment with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Bailey Boswell, from a normal and wholesome family in Lyons, Iowa, grew up as a friendly and successful student who excelled in basketball and running. However, following her father's death, her life took a downward turn. She started keeping bad company and got involved with alcohol and illicit drugs. On a dating website, Bailey met Aubrey Trail, a man with a history of fraud, issuing fraudulent checks and theft. Aubrey had created a cult where he referred to himself as the Vampire Daddy and paid women $200 weekly to follow his unusual rules. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey faced a court order to pay over $40,000 in fraud reparations and had multiple misdemeanors against them. On November 19, 2017, they went into hiding. When police searched their apartment, they found that some walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which a neighbor confirmed. After a few days, the police located Aubrey and Bailey at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, and took them into custody a few weeks after Sydney's disappearance was reported. A thorough examination of phone records and Bailey's location data led the police to the gruesome discovery of Sydney's remains. Her body had been dismembered, with 13 parts found in black plastic bags and ditches in Clay County. Tragically, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improperly disposing of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all three charges. Aubrey, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but guilty to improperly disposing of human remains. However, Aubrey's various statements were inconsistent, and he often appeared confused, changing his account of events and introducing new characters. He made bizarre claims, including that he was a vampire who could fly, and spoke about witchcraft. Aubrey claimed to be a cult leader and vampire, telling authorities he had witches in the cult who needed to kill another woman to gain powers. In one of his early court hearings, Aubrey admitted to killing Sydney Loof, but said it was an accident. He claimed to have paid Sydney $5,000 to participate in a threesome with two other women, which Sydney had agreed to. However, during the act, he strangled her with a cord by mistake. Aubrey also confessed to cutting Sydney's body into pieces, a ritual according to his beliefs, to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place. He believed this would help her reincarnate faster. However, the prosecution presented evidence contradicting Aubrey's story. Surveillance footage from November 14th showed Aubrey and Bailey checking into a Lincoln hotel near Sydney's home. The following day, they visited a home improvement store, buying a hacksaw, bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used to store Sydney's remains. Furthermore, a surveillance camera caught Sydney encountering Aubrey at the Menards store on November 15th, unaware of the danger she was in. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing took place regarding the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof. Although separate trials were ordered for Bailey and Aubrey, the charges against them were essentially the same. The trials were held in Lexington because the defense attorneys successfully argued that a fair trial would be impossible in Wilbur due to the extensive publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that Sydney's death was a premeditated murder, as evidenced by the fact that she was strangled and that the crime was carefully planned and executed. The jury listened to 3 other women who had previously dated Aubrey and Bailey, all of whom they met through Tinder. Each of these women had been intimate with Bailey and had also been involved with Aubrey. One of them shared that she had even gone on a trip with them after they met, during which Aubrey gave her $200 a week and invited her to join his group, which he called Witches, telling her that she would have to torture and kill someone to become a member. Another woman testified that Bailey had discussed breaking her fingers and dissecting a body in detail, revealing her fascination with torture. The prosecution pieced together the events of the fateful evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney had arranged to meet a woman she had known for a couple of days, with whom she had been chatting on Tinder. Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment, and they drove around in his car. The car eventually stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was coaxed into the apartment. Once inside, Bailey and Aubrey attacked her, strangling her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Afterwards, Bailey and Aubrey meticulously cleaned the apartment, which the prosecution argued was a premeditated act. The next day, November 16th, they dismembered Sydney's body and dumped her remains in Clay County. The court heard testimony from Jennifer, the landlord who stayed on November 16th. She drove into the garage and immediately noticed a strong chlorine smell that intensified when she entered the house. The medical examiner testified that Sydney's death was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports showed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system at the time of death. In addition to the missing organs, the upper left arm, from just above the elbow to below the shoulder, was also found to be missing from Sydney's body. The prosecutors sought the death penalty for both defendants, and if the sentence was deemed unjust, the case would be retried. However, Aubrey denied any involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying Sydney's remains. During his trial, Aubrey shouted that Bailey had no involvement in Sydney's death, claiming Bailey's innocence. In a dramatic turn, Aubrey then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade but survived and was detained until he made a full recovery. Aubrey testified he lied about Sydney Loof's death, admitting he met her in 2017 and paid her for illegal activities. He claimed Sydney died accidentally during an intimate act with an extension cord in November 2017. Aubrey confessed to dismembering and dumping her body, but maintained it was an accident, and he didn't seek help because he thought no one would believe him. Aubrey confessed to getting rid of Sydney's body, claiming it was an accident from an extension cord during intimate act. Bailey denied involvement, with her lawyers saying she was also a victim of Aubrey's manipulation. However, phone records and location data proved Bailey's involvement, tracking her near where Sydney's body parts were found. The court learned that Bailey initiated contact with Sydney and arranged a meeting. Bailey drove to Sydney's duplex on the evening of November 15th to pick her up. The prosecution claimed that Bailey took pleasure in discussing cruel acts and enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence presented in court revealed a planned crime on the day Sydney was killed. Bailey and Aubrey went to Home Depot around noon that day, where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter, as part of their plan. Bailey sent Sydney a text message inquiring about her day, and phone records and surveillance footage show that she sent the message from the Menards parking lot, where Aubrey was also present. Sydney, who worked at Menards, seemed unaware of Bailey's presence. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, stating that she was at Sydney's apartment and would pick her up soon. However, phone records indicate that instead of going on a date as Sydney believed, Bailey and Aubrey went to the apartment where they lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that the evidence only showed that Bailey was guilty of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of Sydney's body by buying bleach in garbage bags. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell, received a life sentence. The Loof family had waited 3 long years, grieving and yearning for their Sydney, anticipating a verdict that would bring them solace. Prior to this, on July 11, 2019, a jury took less than 3 hours to convict Aubrey Trail of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. A 3-judge panel described his crime as cold and calculated. In the trial's second phase, determining whether he should face execution, county prosecutors secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail, fulfilling their promise. Consequently, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was put to death by lethal injection. Aubrey Trail, the con artist accused of brutally murdering Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly deceived his cult followers by claiming to be a flying mind-reading vampire with a coven of 12 witches. He claimed these witches gained their powers by killing people. Fortunately, in this real-life story, justice prevailed, and through the trial, the monster faced the end of his trail. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Valeria Vivano. Valeria Fernandez Vivano was born on May 29, 1996 in Laguna, a small commune near Santiago, Chile's capital city. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano. Valeria grew up with her older biological siblings, Michelangelo and Daniela. Her father worked for a transportation company, while her mother was a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising their children and creating a warm home environment. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate, which was a huge shock to her. Although they continued to communicate after the divorce, and her father remained involved in their lives, providing financial support, Valeria harbored resentment towards him. They would occasionally argue, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. After the divorce, Miguel Vivano remarried and had 2 more children, becoming Valeria's half-siblings. Despite this, Valeria, Daniela, and Michelangelo maintained warm relationships with them. Jacqueline, on the other hand, never remarried, focusing on raising her children and later caring for her grandchildren from her older children. Valeria showed a strong-willed character, determination, and perseverance from a young age. She excelled academically, participated in sports, and demonstrated courage and a strong sense of justice, often putting others' needs before her own. Valeria's desire to help those around her, protect the vulnerable, and fight for justice likely inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, Valeria enrolled in the police academy in Santiago, where she graduated with honors in 2016 at the age of 20. The following year, she joined the Chilean police force and began working in the capital's serious crimes unit. From the start of her career, Valeria demonstrated herself to be a dedicated and passionate law enforcement officer, driven by a strong sense of justice. She was deeply committed to her job, performing her duties with diligence and always ready to respond to any situation at a moment's notice. Whether it meant leaving in the middle of the night to investigate a crime scene, pursuing suspects at personal risk, or providing emotional support to those who had lost loved ones, Valeria was always willing to go the extra mile. Her colleagues praised her as kind, cheerful, and friendly, yet she remained a consummate professional and trustworthy partner. Over nearly 5.5 years of service, Valeria received numerous accolades and awards, rapidly advancing in her career and earning the respect of her peers and the admiration of her superiors. A highlight of her career was representing her department in Spain, where she spent 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit, an experience that filled her with immense pride. By 2020, she had risen to the rank of assistant inspector. A 21-year-old rookie cop, Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, joined the precinct where Valeria worked, fresh from the police academy. Valeria took him under her wing, becoming his mentor in his first job. A few months into their partnership, they got along fairly well. Not much is known about Lionel's upbringing, but it's believed he came from a wealthy and influential family with a high-ranking official as an uncle. which gave him a life of comfort and luxury. As a result, Lionel was self-absorbed, expecting everything to go his way. Valeria soon caught Lionel's attention, and he made several attempts to win her over, asking her out on dates, but she rejected him each time. Valeria was dedicated to her job and saw workplace romances as unprofessional. She was also strict with Lionel, viewing him as immature. Although Lionel was only 3 years younger, Valeria found his behavior childish and hoped to help him grow up. On May 29, 2021, Valeria turned 25. She celebrated her birthday at her mother's house, surrounded by many guests, including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. However, Lionel was not invited. Valeria intentionally left him out to avoid any potential awkwardness, as he had recently tried to rekindle their romance. When she talked to him about it, he only reaffirmed his feelings for her, which she wanted to keep private from their colleagues. Valeria looked upset despite the festivities. She was trying to conceal her sadness with a fake smile. The recent quarrel with her father had caused days of silence between them, and she had hoped he would put their differences aside and come to her party, giving them a chance to make up. But all he did was send a congratulatory message without even bothering to phone her. Jacqueline, Valeria's mother, noticed her daughter's distress and knew that the rift with her father was the cause of her sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she was convinced that Miguel would eventually reach out to Valeria and they would talk things through and reconcile. Tragically, Valeria and her father never got the chance to resolve their issues. 2 weeks later, she lost her life in a fatal shooting while on duty on June 13, 2021. Valeria was participating in street patrols and vehicle checks that night, searching for suspects related to a crime that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. The police had issued an alert for a white Kia Chato, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal who was likely armed and possibly accompanied by others in the car. Valeria was riding in a patrol car with her partner Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gilardo. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and immediately gave chase, without waiting for backup. The officers successfully intercepted and blocked the suspect's escape. Canales and Vivano jumped out of their vehicle, guns drawn, and yelled for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands raised. Just then, a single shot rang out, and in the ensuing chaos, Valeria clutched her side and fell to the asphalt beside the police car. Reinforcements arrived simultaneously, and her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but they couldn't fully comprehend what had happened or who had fired. The criminals took advantage of the momentary confusion, sped away, and escaped the scene. Despite the swift arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stop the bleeding, Valeria's life couldn't be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought to save her life for several hours. Unfortunately, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, Valeria passed away on the operating table, never regaining consciousness. Valeria's family rushed to the hospital after hearing the news, but they were too late. Miguel, her dad, was overwhelmed with grief and regret, haunted by their recent petty argument. His guilt was so intense, it put his own health at risk. Valeria died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals, hailed as a hero for giving her life to ensure others' peace and safety. Local media extensively covered the story, praising her courage and selflessness. The public was shocked and captivated by the arrests, and soon the suspects were identified as 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cupin and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was not released due to his age. Both had previous convictions for minor crimes. In response to the arrests, Chile's president, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera, issued an official statement promising that those responsible would face the full extent of the law. As the investigation progressed, some facts didn't add up. Valeria's body was returned to her family after the autopsy and buried in a capital city cemetery, with hundreds attending the funeral. Her parents described the experience as a terrible nightmare. Notably, among those who carried Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who seemed more grief-stricken than anyone else. However, other colleagues reported that there had been recent tension between Valeria and Lionel, to the extent that Valeria didn't even invite him to her birthday celebration. Legal proceedings started right after the funeral against those arrested the next day. Initially, everyone thought the guilty ones were caught and proving it would be easy. But it soon became clear the investigation was flawed, with key details missed and evidence ignored. A month and a half after the officer's death, 2 employees were suspended for their alleged role in the incident. Valeria's parents were called to the prosecutor's office, expecting new evidence. Instead, they were devastated to learn from prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. Subsequent investigations showed that the fatal shot was fired from a service weapon held by one of Valeria's co-workers. A same-day ballistics test confirmed this, but the results were tampered with, and the bullet's characteristics, shape, caliber, and weight were incorrectly recorded in the evidence locker. Furthermore, the bullet had passed through Valeria's body, but it wasn't extracted. Instead, it was reported to have been extracted, and the entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were switched. The shot was fired into her back, not her abdomen. Furthermore, the detainees who were on trial, claiming to have confessed to their involvement and were on the verge of imprisonment, began filing complaints. They alleged that their confessions were obtained through torture and threats, and the pistol they had with them that evening was not even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the prior crime that prompted the interception plan that fateful night remained unconfirmed. A surprising twist emerged in the public's perception of Vivano, transforming her from a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to an innocent victim betrayed by her own colleagues. As a result, the main suspect shifted to Felipe Gilardo Ara, who was driving the police car, and Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales, Vivano's partner, who was seated in the back. Both were immediately suspended from duty. On August 5th, it was discovered that the fatal bullet came from a police-issued weapon. A document surfaced showing examination results that implicated Lionel as the prime suspect, as he was the only one with gunshot residue on his hands, a crucial finding that had been mysteriously left out of previous reports. Additionally, several other vital documents, including ballistics examination reports and the pathologist's conclusions, were improperly stored in an archive box that had not been thoroughly reviewed. It remains unclear whether this was an accident, an oversight, or a deliberate attempt to conceal crucial evidence. The police officers involved in the operation to catch the criminals surprisingly became suspects in the murder of their fellow officer. Along with the suspects already arrested, they participated in a reenactment of the events of that night to clarify what had happened. In the reenactment, Philippe, who was driving, explained that he could only see Valeria, who was sitting next to him in the front passenger seat, when she got out of the car. Lionel, who was sitting behind them, also exited the vehicle, but Philippe couldn't see what he was doing. According to Philippe, Valeria took just a few steps before a shot was fired, causing her to fall to the ground. At that point, Lionel rushed to help the injured woman and provide first aid to try to save her life. Lionel gave a different account of what happened, saying that he and his partner Valeria got out of the patrol car at almost the same time, but she rushed forward immediately after the shot was fired. He denied shooting his colleague, Valeria, and claimed that Philippe, the driver, should have seen him trying to help Valeria and confirmed this. According to Lionel, he was the first to assist Valeria and tried to stop her bleeding to prevent her from dying. The investigation managed to reconstruct the events, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. They found that Canales was behind his partner when the shot was fired, which corresponded with the bullet's trajectory. Furthermore, he was the only one with traces of gunshot residue on his hands. Lionel was arrested as prime suspect after secret reports and test results were released, while other detainees were freed on condition they stay local, lacking evidence to implicate them. But the officers' motives remained unclear. The prevailing theory is that a tragic accident occurred when an inexperienced young officer unintentionally fired his weapon while standing behind his partner. In a state of panic, he attempted to assist her. Later, when submitting his service weapon, he falsely claimed not to have fired it. However, the truth eventually came to light, exposing that influential relatives of the young officer exploited their power, wealth, and connections to conceal the incident, leading to fabricated reports, missing documents, contradictory evidence, and coerced testimony from detained individuals. Despite Canale's arrest, suspicions about Felipe's involvement persisted. Felipe was also armed with the same service weapons, was present at the scene, and could have accidentally fired the fatal shot. Additionally, Felipe had a history of using his weapon unjustifiably during an arrest, although no one was harmed on that occasion. The defense team, hired by Lionel's relatives, presented a theory that Felipe might have accidentally shot his colleague due to the identical service weapons, which could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Felipe's own testimony was inconsistent, and he claimed he couldn't accurately describe the events that took place. Despite this, the lack of gunpowder residue on the driver's hands suggested his innocence. Felipe's explanation that the residue came from when he was compressing the victim's wound was not believable, given that Valeria's blood stains remained on his hands. The investigation was widely criticized, and the victim's parents were left feeling desperate, leading to public outrage and a loss of trust in law enforcement. Following further investigation, Lionel remained the sole suspect. Lionel was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, in a surprise move, the Supreme Court later overturned the sentence, reducing his imprisonment to just 540 days. Valeria's family is now planning to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption.